My name is Abigail. I am 28 years old. I work as a corporate payroll accountant in downtown Chicago. If you know anything about accountants, you know we live by a strict code of order. We like predictability. We like things that balance. We do not like surprises. For the past year, I had applied that exact same logic to planning my wedding. Every single detail was organized into a color-coded spreadsheet. The caterers were confirmed. The floral arrangements were paid in full. The seating chart was mapped out so that every guest would feel perfectly comfortable. But no spreadsheet in the world could have prepared me for the utter collapse of my reality on the day I was supposed to get married. I stood frozen in my wedding dress, a heavy custom lace gown that suddenly felt like a straitjacket. The church organist was playing the processional march for the third consecutive time. The music echoed through the massive vaulted ceilings of the sanctuary, but the heavy oak doors at the back of the church remained firmly shut. My father was supposed to walk through those doors, take my arm, and walk me down the aisle. But he was not there. In fact, none of them were there. The first 4 rows of pews, specifically reserved for my immediate family, were completely empty. 200 guests were shifting in their seats, whispering behind their hands. At the end of the aisle, my groom James looked absolutely sick with worry. My hands shook so violently that I dropped my bridal bouquet. When my phone finally buzzed in my hand, I thought it was their excuse. A flat tire. Bad traffic on the interstate. But the message from my father read just 9 words. Do not look for us. You are on your own now. Minutes later, the church doors finally swung open. But it was not my family walking inside. It was a stern, elderly stranger holding a thick manila folder that would prove my entire life was a lie. Before I tell you who that man was, and the twisted financial secret my family was running from, please take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy stories about justice and standing up for yourself. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. I read every single comment. Now, let me take you into the suffocating heat of that church vestibule where my nightmare officially began. The air in the back room of the church felt thick and unbreathable. My bridesmaids were hovering around me in their matching dresses, exchanging panicked glances, offering me cups of water I could not stomach. The scent of the white lilies, which I had spent months meticulously picking out, now made me violently nauseous. The stained glass windows cast colorful, mocking shadows across the marble floor. James had abandoned his post at the altar and rushed to the back to be with me. He stood by my side, his face pale, holding my cold hand. The murmurs from the main sanctuary were growing louder, transforming from polite whispers into a low, chaotic rumble. It was nearly an hour past the scheduled start time. I pulled my phone from my maid of honor's grip. My fingers were slick with nervous sweat. I dialed my father, Richard. It rang twice and went straight to automated voicemail. I called my mother, Susan. Straight to voicemail. I dialed my younger sister, Chloe. The call dropped immediately. They were intentionally rejecting my calls. Panic, cold and sharp, crawled up my spine. Did they get into a terrible accident? Was there a massive pileup on the highway? I pulled up the family tracking app on my phone, the one my mother always insisted we use for family safety. I checked their profiles. Every single one of their locations was completely turned off. My maid of honor tried to sound reassuring. Maybe they just lost track of time at the hotel, she whispered. Though her voice lacked any real conviction, nobody loses track of time on their older daughter's wedding day. Nobody just forgets to show up. As the brutal minutes ticked by, my mind started desperately searching for reasons. My parents and I had a solid relationship, or so I had always forced myself to believe. I was the responsible child. I was the rock. I had literally kept a roof over their heads for half a decade. Chloe was the golden child. Growing up, I learned quickly that love in our house was transactional and fiercely conditional. Chloe had my mother's blonde hair and my mother's complete devotion. She was going to be a model or an actress or something glamorous. That meant she needed the best clothes, the most expensive skincare, and constant financial bailouts. I was just the workhorse. I was the reliable one. When Chloe racked up $10,000 in credit card debt during her senior year of college, my parents did not punish her. They simply asked me to consolidate her debt under my name. I took on a second job doing freelance bookkeeping on weekends just to pay it off, all while maintaining my demanding corporate position. I believed that fixing their mistakes was how I earned my place in the family. 5 years ago, when the economy dipped, my father's construction company took a massive financial hit. He sat me down at the kitchen table one rainy Tuesday night, his face buried in his hands, telling me the bank was going to foreclose on their beautiful suburban house. Chloe was still in college at the time, living in a luxury sorority house that my parents somehow still managed to pay for. I did what the good practical daughter always does. I stepped up and took over their mortgage payments, $3,500 every single month, automatically drafted from my hard-earned accounting salary straight to their lender. I drove a battered 10-year-old sedan. I skipped vacations. I brought bagged lunches to the office every single day, so my parents would not lose their home. I even went a step further. I signed as a personal guarantor on a massive business loan to save his failing construction company. I remember that night perfectly. He brought the paperwork to my apartment, smelling of cheap coffee and nervous sweat. He told me it was just a simple formality. He said, "Abigail, you have stellar credit, and you understand these financial documents better than anyone. Just put your name here and the bank will give us the extension we need to survive. We are family. We protect each other." I signed the papers. I protected them. I poured my life savings into their comfort. And now, on the most important day of my life, they were nowhere to be found. The organist finally stopped playing. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the music. James gently rubbed my arm. "Abby," he said softly, "we need to make a decision. The priest is asking what we want to do." Before I could answer him, my phone vibrated in my palm. A single text message from my father had just come through. My heart leaped into my throat. I opened the message, desperately expecting a frantic explanation about a hospital visit or a broken-down car. The words on the bright screen made no sense to me at first. I read them once. I read them again. "Do not look for us. You are on your own now." I stared at the screen until the black letters blurred into meaningless shapes. "You are on your own now." What did that even mean? You do not say that to a bride waiting to walk down the aisle. You say that to someone you are abandoning permanently. A cold, terrifying realization began to settle in the pit of my stomach. The empty pews were not an accident. The turned-off location tracking was not a glitch. The ignored phone calls were completely deliberate. They had packed up and left me. But why? I looked up at James, my vision swimming with tears, and handed him the phone. His eyes scanned the short message and his jaw tightened with immediate anger. "Abby, what is this? What is going on?" I shook my head, unable to form a single word. The illusion of my loving family was shattering like cheap glass on a tile floor. Every late night I spent balancing my father's business ledgers for free. Every time I transferred money to my mother so she could buy Chloe a designer dress for her birthday, every single sacrifice I ever made flashed before my eyes. They did not just miss my wedding. They ran away from it. Let me explain how deep this betrayal cut. Just 3 nights ago, my father hugged me after our wedding rehearsal dinner. He had tears in his eyes. He told me how incredibly proud he was of the woman I had become. He promised he would not cry when he walked me down the aisle. My mother had fussed over the floral arrangements, insisting that the centerpieces for the family tables needed extra imported roses. She complained about the cost, subtly hinting that I should cover the difference, which of course I did. Chloe had complained that her bridesmaid dress was not flattering enough and demanded I pay for a last-minute tailor to alter it. I paid for that too. I paid for everything. They acted perfectly normal. They played their parts flawlessly. And all the while they must have been secretly packing their bags. I collapsed onto a wooden chair in the vestibule, the layers of my heavy tulle dress gathering around me like a white cage. "I do not understand," I whispered. My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to a complete stranger. Did I do something wrong? Did we have a massive fight? I do not remember. James knelt down in front of me, taking both of my shaking hands in his warm grip. "You did nothing wrong, Abigail. This is on them. Whatever sick game they are playing, it is unforgivable, and I am so deeply sorry. But it was not a game. I am an accountant. I deal with hard facts, with numbers that always balance, with equations that have rational solutions. People do not just vanish on a Saturday afternoon without a tangible, highly calculated reason. You do not completely cut off your primary source of financial support unless you are running from something much bigger. As an accountant, you are trained to look for discrepancies. You look for the missing decimal point, the unrecorded transaction, the hidden liability. For the first time, I turned that analytical lens onto my own family. My parents did not have savings. They lived entirely paycheck to paycheck, supplemented entirely by my monthly transfers. So how did they afford plane tickets? How did they afford to vanish? You need cash to disappear. You need a massive amount of liquid assets to simply walk away from a house, a business, and a life. Where did that money come from? My brain violently shifted from the heartbroken bride to the analytical professional. The business loan. The massive commercial loan I had signed as a personal guarantor. My father had been acting very strangely for the past month. He kept bringing me random stacks of papers to sign late at night, claiming they were just routine tax extensions for the LLC. "Just routine compliance, Abby," he would say, tapping his pen impatiently on my kitchen counter. "You know how the IRS gets at the end of the quarter." I had been so exhausted with wedding planning and managing my full-time corporate job that I just skimmed the headers and signed the bottom lines. I trusted him implicitly. He was my father. Why would I ever audit my own father? The murmurs from the main sanctuary suddenly swelled into a dull, restless roar. The guests were getting extremely uncomfortable. The wedding coordinator walked into the vestibule, her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest, looking between James and me with deep, agonizing pity. "Abigail," she said softly, "the guests are starting to ask loud questions. Some people are getting up from their seats and looking toward the back. What should I tell them?" I looked at the closed oak doors separating me from the crowd. I looked at James. I had no answers to give anyone. I was a bride with no family holding a phone with a message that read exactly like a ransom note without any demands. I took a deep breath, preparing to stand up and face the ultimate humiliation of walking out there to cancel my own wedding. I gripped James's hand tightly, ready to surrender to the absolute worst day of my entire life. But I never had to make that terrible announcement. Because at that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the entrance of the church did not just open. They burst apart. The bright sunlight from the Chicago afternoon flooded the dark vestibule, blinding me for a fraction of a second. I squinted against the harsh glare, fully expecting to see my father running in late, expecting to hear my mother making a loud, dramatic excuse about traffic. Instead, the silhouette framed in the doorway belonged to a man I had never seen before in my life. He was older, dressed in a sharp gray suit, holding a massive manila folder. He did not look at the wedding coordinator. He did not look at James. His cold, calculating eyes locked directly on me, pinning me in place. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church did not just open. They burst apart. The bright afternoon sunlight flooded the dark vestibule, casting a long and blinding shadow across the marble floor. I squinted against the harsh glare. For one desperate second, my heart leaped in my chest. I expected to see my father rushing in, sweating and apologizing for a flat tire. I expected my mother to be complaining loudly about the highway traffic while fixing her hair. I even expected my sister Chloe to be whining about her makeup melting in the heat. But the silhouette framed in the doorway did not belong to anyone in my family. As the doors swung shut, cutting off the bright sunlight, the figure stepped into the dim light of the church vestibule. It was a man I had never seen before in my life. He looked to be about 60 years old. He stood tall and rigid, wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit that looked entirely out of place at a summer wedding. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of deep exhaustion that only comes from decades of stressful work. In his right hand, he gripped a massively thick manila folder. He did not look like a late wedding guest. He looked like an executioner. The murmurs inside the main sanctuary instantly grew louder. 200 guests turned in their wooden pews, their polished shoes scraping against the floorboards. The sudden noise sounded like a rising tide of pure confusion. The wedding coordinator took a quick step forward, holding up her clipboard as if it could act as a shield. She opened her mouth to ask the man to leave, but he simply held up his left hand. It was a silent gesture of absolute and terrifying authority. The coordinator froze in her tracks. The man walked straight down the center aisle. His hard leather shoes clicked heavily against the stone floor. Click, click, click. Every single step echoed through the vaulted ceilings like a ticking clock. My groom James immediately stepped in front of me, putting his body between me and the approaching stranger. James reached back and grabbed my trembling hand. He was trying to protect me, but you cannot protect someone from the truth. The man stopped exactly 3 feet away from us. He did not look at the confused priest standing near the altar. He did not look at the beautiful and expensive white roses I had spent months paying for. He looked directly into my eyes. His gaze was cold, analytical, and filled with a heavy sense of pity. "Abigail," he said. His voice was deep, steady, and completely calm. "My name is Thomas Caldwell. I am an independent forensic accountant. I need you to listen to me very carefully." I stared at him in pure shock. The words forensic accountant bounced around my mind, refusing to make any logical sense. "I am a corporate payroll accountant. I know exactly what forensic accountants do for a living. They follow the money when someone is desperately trying to hide it. They dig through the ashes of ruined companies to find the lies. They track down financial predators." Why on earth was a forensic accountant standing at the altar of my wedding? I looked down at the thick folder in his large hand. The label was printed in bold black letters. It read, "Richards LLC Bankruptcy and Asset Diversion." My father's company. The construction company I had personally helped save from total ruin. The company I had poured my own pristine credit into. The company that had cost me countless sleepless nights. "What is this?" James demanded. His voice was tight with protective anger. "Who are you, and why are you interrupting our wedding ceremony?" Thomas Caldwell did not flinch. He did not even blink. "I am not interrupting your wedding, son. I am here to tell your bride why her family is not sitting in those front rows." My heart literally stopped beating. The air in the church suddenly felt freezing cold. My hands trembled so violently that James had to grip my fingers tighter just to steady me. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice came out as a fragile, broken whisper. "Are they hurt? Did something happen to them on the way here? Your family did not get delayed by traffic, Abigail. They did not have a medical emergency. At exactly 4 o'clock this morning, your father, your mother, and your sister boarded a private charter flight out of the state. They have no intention of returning." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. 4 in the morning. While I was lying in my bed, too excited to sleep, imagining my father crying happy tears as he walked me down the aisle. They were actively loading luggage onto an airplane. While I was practicing the vows, I was going to say to James, my family was running away from me. "That is impossible," I said. I shook my head frantically, my heavy veil pulling at my hair. "You are lying to me. You have to be lying. My father just sent me a text message 5 minutes ago, saying what Thomas asked quietly. Did he tell you not to look for them? Did he tell you that you are on your own now?" I gasped loudly. The sound echoed in the silent church. How did he know that? How could a total stranger possibly know the exact 9 words my father had just sent to my private phone? "Because he knows the federal authorities are coming for him," Thomas explained. His voice was devoid of any emotion, delivering facts with brutal precision. "I was hired 6 months ago by a group of private real estate investors. Your father told these investors his construction company was failing due to a terrible housing market. He formally filed for bankruptcy protection. He sat in boardrooms and cried. He claimed he had lost absolutely everything. But men like your father never actually lose everything. They just move the money to places where no one else can see it." The 200 guests in the church were completely silent now. Nobody was shifting in their seats. Nobody was whispering. Everyone was listening to the absolute destruction of my life. Your father's company did not go bankrupt, Abigail. He systematically and intentionally laundered millions of dollars over the past 5 years. He set up dummy vendors. He faked hundreds of invoices for construction materials that never existed. He bled his own loyal investors dry and funneled all the cash into private offshore holding accounts. No, I cried out. My voice broke completely. He was struggling. I saw the company books myself. I helped him pay his personal mortgage for 5 years, so he would not lose his house. I saw the massive debt. I sacrificed my own savings to keep my family afloat. You saw the debt he wanted you to see? Thomas corrected me. His eyes softened just a fraction, but his words remained sharp. He manipulated the ledgers you looked at. He kept 2 entirely different sets of books. The fake ones he showed his accountant daughter, and the real ones he used to steal the money. He needed you to believe he was failing so you would feel sorry for him. He needed you to bail him out so you would feel emotionally invested in his business. James stepped completely in front of me, shielding me from the forensic accountant. That is enough. Get out of this church right now. You are scaring my wife. She needs to be scared, Thomas said. His voice lost its calm edge and became urgent and demanding. She needs to understand exactly what her family did to her before Monday morning arrives. Because on Monday morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is going to freeze every single asset attached to that LLC. They are going to issue federal arrest warrants. And they are going to come looking for the sole legal guarantor of those massive fraudulent loans. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. The legal guarantor. The words bounced around the inside of my skull until they made me dizzy. I am a corporate accountant. I know exactly what a legal guarantor is. A guarantor is the person who signs their name on the dotted line, promising to pay back the entire debt if the primary borrower defaults. The guarantor takes on all the legal liability. The guarantor takes on all the financial risk. The guarantor is the one the banks and the government come after when the money disappears. I looked at Thomas Caldwell. My vision was blurring with hot, angry tears. I did not sign as a guarantor for millions of dollars. I signed a basic extension agreement to keep the local bank from foreclosing on his construction equipment. He brought me the papers late at night. I was exhausted from working a 12-hour shift. He said they were just routine tax compliance forms. Thomas opened the thick manila folder. He pulled out a heavy stack of legal papers and handed them directly to me. The parchment felt like solid lead in my shaking hands. I looked down at the signature lines at the bottom of the pages. There was my name, Abigail, signed in blue ink, dated across multiple pages, over and over again. But the headers on these pages were not tax extensions. They were unconditional personal guarantees. They were corporate asset transfer authorizations. They were legally binding documents assigning full criminal and financial liability to me. He intentionally rushed you, Thomas said. He brought those documents to you when you were tired and stressed about planning this wedding. He counted on your blind trust. He knew you would not read the fine print because he is your father and you are a good daughter. He used your pristine credit score and your stable corporate income to secure the fraudulent loans. Then he drained the accounts, moved the cash offshore, and left you holding the empty bag. I could not breathe. The stone walls of the church were spinning violently around me. My own father. The man who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The man who gave a tearful, loving speech at my rehearsal dinner just 3 nights ago. He had spent months meticulously planning my absolute destruction. He did not just use me for my money. He used me as his human shield. They left today for a very specific reason, Thomas continued. They knew my team, and the defrauded investors were closing in on the truth. They knew the federal agents were preparing subpoenas for next week. By fleeing the country on the exact day of your wedding, they ensured you would be completely distracted. They knew you would be standing right here in a white dress, surrounded by friends and flowers, completely oblivious to the fact that your entire life was being dismantled behind your back. You are the perfect decoy. I dropped the papers. They scattered across the polished marble floor like fallen snow. James dropped to his knees and started gathering them up. His strong hands were shaking visibly as his eyes scanned the legal clauses and the staggering numbers printed on the pages. Abby James whispered. His voice was full of absolute horror. These numbers. They are in the millions. Millions of dollars. Millions of dollars stolen from private investors. Millions of dollars laundered through fake construction vendors. And my signature was the only one securing the massive debt. My parents and my sister Chloe were currently on a luxury flight to a tropical paradise, laughing and drinking expensive champagne while I was about to face federal prison. Why are you telling me this? I asked Thomas. If you represent the investors he stole from, why are you here warning me? You should be calling the police. You should be having me arrested. Because I have spent 30 years tracking financial predators, Thomas said. I know exactly what a victim looks like. I looked deeply into your background, Abigail. You live in a modest apartment. You drive an old car. You bring your lunch to work every day to save money. You have not touched a single dime of the stolen millions. Your father set you up to take the ultimate fall. I threw you to the wolves so he could escape with his golden child. The investors just want their money back. They do not care who goes to jail. But I do not like seeing innocent people destroyed by the very people who were supposed to protect them. I looked back at the empty pews. The first 4 rows, the velvet ropes marking them as reserved for the family of the bride. The emptiness was no longer just a physical absence. It was a gaping black hole that had swallowed my entire past. My mother knew. Susan had to know everything. That was exactly why she made me pay for the extra imported roses last week. That was why she demanded I pay for my sister's incredibly expensive tailored dress. They were bleeding me dry for every last usable penny before they threw me away like garbage. Chloe knew too. She complained endlessly about the wedding venue being too cheap, all while sitting on millions of stolen dollars. They all knew. They sat around the dinner table with me and smiled warmly while they actively planned my funeral. What happens now? James asked loudly. He stood up and wrapped his arm firmly around my waist. He was not running away. He was planting his feet and staying right here with me. What happens now is that you have exactly 48 hours, Thomas said. The federal agents will move on Monday morning as soon as the banks open. Once they freeze your personal accounts and issue the arrest warrants, you will be caught in a legal nightmare that could take a decade to untangle. You need to prove you were completely defrauded. You need to prove your father forged the intent of these documents. And most importantly, you need to find out exactly where he hid the money before the FBI kicks your door down. I stared at the closed church doors. The bright sunlight waiting outside looked harsh and unforgiving. I was supposed to be walking out of those doors as a happy married woman. I was supposed to be tossing my floral bouquet and leaving for a romantic honeymoon. Instead, I was standing in a pile of fraudulent financial documents, facing federal prosecution. Because the people who gave me life had decided I was nothing more than a convenient sacrifice. A deep primal anger began to rise in the center of my chest. It pushed fiercely through the thick fog of shock. It burned away the threatening tears. It replaced the devastating sorrow with a cold, hard, and calculating rage. My father thought he was brilliant. He thought he could use my blind love as a weapon against me. He thought I was just a naive, obedient daughter who would sit quietly in a courtroom and take the blame while he lived like a king on a private beach. But my father made one massive, fatal miscalculation. He forgot who I really am. I am not just a good daughter. I am a corporate accountant. I know exactly how numbers hide. I know how to trace a wire transfer through a dozen shell companies. I know how to find the missing decimal points. I know how to break down a balance sheet until it screams the absolute truth. I reached down and picked up my heavy bridal veil from the floor. I did not put it back on my head. I handed it directly to the shocked wedding coordinator. Cancel the reception, I told her. My voice was no longer shaking. It was made of solid steel. Tell the guests to go home. The wedding is over. I turned back to Thomas Caldwell. The elderly forensic accountant watched me with a look of quiet, profound respect. He had brought me the worst news of my entire life, but he had also given me the exact tools I needed to fight back. You have the master files from his bankruptcy claim, I asked Thomas. I have everything he submitted to the investors, Thomas replied. Then we have a massive amount of work to do, I said. I looked up at James, my beautiful, loyal groom who had not taken a single step away from me. I am so sorry, James. I love you, but I have to tear my family apart. James grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight. We will tear them apart together, he said. The sound of the heavy wooden doors clicking shut behind us severed the chaotic noise of the main sanctuary. My wedding coordinator had been left outside to deal with the 200 confused guests, the catered food that would never be eaten, and the floral arrangements that now felt like funeral wreaths. We were standing in the bridal suite. Just 2 hours ago, this room had been filled with the joyful sounds of my bridesmaids, opening champagne, the smell of expensive hairspray, and the nervous, beautiful anticipation of a woman about to marry the love of her life. Now the room felt like a concrete holding cell. The discarded champagne flutes and half-eaten pastries scattered across the vanity table looked like the ruins of a life I used to believe in. James did not let go of my hand. He guided me to the plush velvet chair in the center of the room and gently helped me sit down. My custom lace wedding dress, which I had spent 8 months of my salary paying for, pooled around me like a heavy, suffocating weight. James took off his tailored suit jacket, tossed it onto a nearby sofa, and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. He did not pace. He did not panic. He simply stood right beside my chair, placing a warm, steadying hand on my shoulder. His presence was the only thing keeping me tethered to the floor. Thomas Caldwell, the forensic accountant who had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my reality, walked over to the long makeup table. He pushed aside a pile of discarded bobby pins and lipstick tubes to make room. He laid the massive manila folder down on the glass surface and opened it carefully. The bright vanity lights illuminated the stark black ink on the white legal paper. Abigail, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a low professional cadence. I need you to look at these documents. I need you to verify your signatures. I know this is the absolute last thing you want to do on your wedding day, but the federal authorities will not care about your wedding dress. They will only care about the ink on these pages. I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt like they were made of water. James kept his hand on the small of my back, supporting my weight as I moved toward the table. I looked down at the first document. The header was printed in bold, intimidating letters. Unconditional continuing guarantee. As a corporate payroll accountant, I spend my life staring at spreadsheets, tax codes, and compliance regulations. I understand the language of money. I understand the binding nature of legal financial terms. When you sign an unconditional continuing guarantee, you are essentially telling a financial institution that if the primary borrower defaults on their loan, you will step in and pay every single penny of that debt. You are pledging your own assets, your own credit, and your own future to secure someone else's money. I stared at the bottom of the page. There it was, my full legal name, Abigail Rose Sterling, signed in my exact handwriting, dated just 6 months ago. I flipped to the next page. It was a commercial promissory note for $3.2 million. My signature was on the guarantor line. I flipped to the next page. A cross-collateralization agreement pledging my future earnings and my personal credit capacity against the debt of my father's construction company. My signature was there too. There were dozens of pages. The sheer volume of the legal paperwork was staggering. He came to my apartment, I whispered, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form the words. I placed my fingertips against the cold glass of the vanity table to steady myself. It was a Tuesday night in late November. I remember because it was raining and I was exhausted from working a 14-hour shift to close out the year-end payroll reconciliations for my company. He showed up at my door with my favorite takeout food. He looked so tired and stressed. He told me the bank was threatening to audit his construction equipment unless he updated his tax compliance files. Thomas looked at me with deep, solemn pity. And he told you these were just routine tax forms. I nodded, the tears finally spilling over my eyelashes and hot down my cheeks. He kept his hand over the top half of the pages. He was talking rapidly, asking me about my wedding plans, asking me about James. keeping me completely distracted. He just kept pointing to the bottom lines, telling me to sign quickly so he could submit them to his local bank manager in the morning. He said, "You know how the IRS gets Abby. Just sign here and I can finally get some sleep." I trusted him. He is my father. I had already been paying his home mortgage for 5 years. Why would I ever demand to audit the man who raised me? Thomas slowly turned the pages, revealing the notary stamps. He had his office manager notarize your signatures after the fact. He used your pristine credit score, your clean financial history, and your solid corporate job to secure massive commercial loans from private investment groups. Because his own company was secretly bleeding cash, no legitimate bank would touch him. But with a young, successful corporate accountant signing as the unconditional guarantor, the private lenders opened their vaults. The sickening reality of what Thomas was saying began to sink into my bones. The numbers on the pages were astronomical, millions upon millions of dollars. But what hurt far worse than the numbers was the cold, calculated manipulation. My father had used my love for him as a weapon. He weaponized my loyalty. I used the very same responsible nature he had praised me for to dig a grave and push me inside it. Then the memories hit me. The brutal, unmistakable flashes of realization that made my stomach churn with violent nausea, just 1 month after that rainy Tuesday night when I signed away my life. My younger sister Chloe drove up to our family Sunday dinner in a brand new custom-ordered Porsche Macan. The car cost nearly $90,000. When I asked how she could possibly afford a luxury sports car on her part-time salary as a boutique receptionist, my father had laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. He told me his construction firm had just landed a massive, highly lucrative government contract. He said he wanted to spoil his youngest daughter to celebrate. Chloe had tossed her keys on the kitchen counter, smiling that perfect, arrogant smile of hers. She told me I should stop driving my beat-up 10-year-old sedan and live a little. She told me I was too frugal. 2 months after the Porsche arrived, my mother Susan announced she was taking a 3-week luxury river cruise down the Danube in Europe. She flew first class. She stayed in 5-star historic castle suites. She posted endless photographs on social media, holding expensive glasses of champagne on private balconies overlooking ancient European cities. Her captions were always about the blessings of hard work and the rewards of a successful family business. I had liked those photos. I had commented on them, telling her how beautiful she looked and how much she deserved a vacation. While she was sipping vintage champagne in Austria, I was sitting in my tiny Chicago apartment eating leftover pasta and wearing a sweater indoors because I kept my thermostat turned down to save money. I was denying myself basic comforts so I could afford to pay the monthly mortgage on the house she had left behind. They did not have a government contract. They had me. They financed Chloe's luxury sports car under my stolen credit. They paid for Susan's lavish European vacations using the very loan money that was currently threatening to send me to a federal penitentiary. Every designer handbag Chloe bought, every expensive dinner my parents hosted at their country club, every single ounce of their wealthy, sophisticated facade was paid for with my blood, my sweat, and my destroyed future. They had lived like royalty while treating me like an unpaid servant, and they had done it all while looking me directly in the eyes and telling me they loved me. I felt a scream building in my chest, a loud primal sound of pure agony, but it never made it past my throat. Because at that exact second my cell phone resting on the makeup table next to the fraudulent documents began to vibrate. It buzzed once, a short, sharp burst, then it buzzed again, and again, and again. The rapid, relentless vibration rattled against the glass table, sounding like a warning siren in the quiet bridal suite. James reached for the phone and handed it to me. The screen was completely filled with automated text messages and push notifications. The sender was Chase Bank. Fraud alert. Immediate action required. Your accounts have been frozen due to suspicious activity and massive default risk. Please contact our loss prevention department immediately. The next message was from American Express. Urgent. Your Platinum credit account has been suspended due to an outstanding balance exceeding your approved limit by $50,000. The next was from Wells Fargo. Account restricted. Legal hold placed on all checking and savings accounts pending federal review. My hands shook violently as I unlocked my phone and opened my primary banking application. The loading screen seemed to take an eternity. I begged whatever higher power was listening that this was just a mistake, a temporary hold, a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a phone call. The dashboard finally loaded. Primary checking account. Balance. $0. Emergency savings account. The account where I had saved every single penny for 5 years to pay for this wedding and a down payment on a house with James. Balance. $0. Investment portfolio. Liquidated. Balance. $0. I could not breathe. I frantically clicked on the recent transaction history. At exactly 4:00 this morning, the exact same time my family had boarded a private charter flight out of the state, massive wire transfers had been executed across all of my connected accounts. They had drained everything. The private investors my father had defrauded had triggered a default clause, and the financial institutions had instantly swept my accounts to cover the massive debts my father had tied to my name. Because I was the guarantor, the banks had every legal right to seize my assets the second the primary loans went into default. My father knew this. He timed his escape perfectly. He knew that the moment he vanished and stopped paying the interest on his fraudulent loans, the banks would immediately trigger the collection algorithms. He timed it so the financial collapse would hit me right as I was putting on my wedding dress. I dropped the phone. It hit the glass table with a loud cracking sound. "I have nothing," I whispered. My voice was completely hollow. I looked at James, and the absolute devastation in my chest finally broke through my calm facade. "They took everything, James. My checking account, my savings. My credit cards are maxed out and frozen. I am completely destitute. I do not even have a single dollar to my name." James pulled me tightly into his chest. He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my hair. He did not care about the money. He only cared about me. "We will figure it out," he murmured fiercely against my temple. "We do not need their money. We have each other. We will fight this." But the reality of the situation was far worse than simply being broke. I was not just starting from zero. I was starting from negative millions. On the day I was supposed to marry the man of my dreams, my biological family had financially executed me. They had stripped me of my past savings, my present stability, and my future earnings. They had left me in a room full of expensive wedding flowers. I could no longer pay for wearing a dress that felt like a burial shroud. The silence in the bridal suite was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my mind desperately trying to process the fact that I had just been financially erased. James held me tightly against his chest, his heart beating a rapid, steady rhythm against my cheek. He was whispering words of comfort, telling me that money did not matter, telling me that we would rebuild our lives together from scratch. But I could not hear him. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was a deafening roar in my ears. I was completely destitute. My credit was destroyed. I was the primary target for a federal investigation involving millions of stolen dollars, and the people who had orchestrated my absolute ruin were my own flesh and blood. Thomas Caldwell cleared his throat. The sound was soft, but it cut through the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the room like a blade. He did not look at me with pity anymore. His expression had shifted into something far more serious, something deeply somber. He reached into his thick manila folder one last time. "I am truly sorry to do this right now," Abigail Thomas said, his voice low and steady. "But you need to see the entire picture. The fraudulent loans and the money laundering were only the mechanics of his escape. They were the smokescreen. What I am about to show you is the actual motive. It is the reason your father chose today, your wedding day, to disappear." I slowly pulled away from James. My legs were still trembling, but I forced myself to stand upright. I placed my hands flat on the cold glass surface of the vanity table, bracing myself. I thought I had already reached the absolute bottom of my grief. I thought there was nothing left for my father to take from me. I was wrong. Thomas slid a bound stack of papers across the glass table. The documents were visibly older than the fresh bank records we had just reviewed. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, and the blue protective cover bore the distinctive seal of a probate court from 2 decades ago. I looked down at the first page. The text was printed in a formal, antiquated legal font. I read the title of the document. The Catherine Sterling Irrevocable Trust. My breath caught in my throat. Catherine, my biological mother. She had died of aggressive breast cancer when I was just 8 years old. My memories of her were fragmented but fiercely protected. I remembered the smell of her lavender perfume. I remembered the way she used to sit at the kitchen table meticulously balancing her checkbook, teaching me how to count coins. I remembered the fierce, unwavering way she loved me. 2 years after she passed away, my father married Susan. Susan brought her own daughter Chloe into the house, and almost overnight all traces of my mother were systematically erased. Her photographs were packed into boxes in the attic. Her name was rarely spoken. I grew up believing my mother had left me nothing but a handful of fading memories. "What is this?" I whispered, my fingers hovering over the heavy paper. I did not dare touch it, afraid it might turn to dust. "When your biological mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer," Thomas explained gently, "she knew her time was terribly short. She also knew your father had a reckless history with money. She wanted to ensure that you would be completely protected no matter what happened to her or what poor choices your father made in the future. She took her life insurance payout, her personal savings, and the inheritance she had received from her own parents, and she placed it all into an irrevocable trust. You were named as the sole beneficiary. Your father was named as the trustee, meaning he had a strict legal fiduciary duty to manage that money solely for your ultimate benefit." I stared at the pages. A trust fund. My mother had left me a trust fund. For 20 years, I had lived in a house where I was treated like a burden. I had worn second-hand clothes, while Chloe wore designer brands. I had worked 3 jobs in college to avoid taking out student loans, because my father claimed he was broke. I had paid their mortgage. And all the while, there had been a safety net created entirely out of my mother's love for me. "How much was in it?" James asked. His voice was thick with barely contained fury. He moved closer to this table, looking over my shoulder at the financial schedules attached to the back of the trust document. "The initial principal was just over $1 million, Thomas answered. With 20 years of standard market interest and compound growth, the trust should have been valued at roughly $3.5 million by today. $3.5 million. The number echoed in the small bridal suite, massive and incomprehensible. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. "But it is not." "There is it?" I asked. My voice sounded completely detached from my body. I already knew the answer. I knew the kind of man my father was. I just needed to hear it spoken aloud. "No," Thomas said quietly. "It is gone. Every single penny has been drained. As the trustee, your father had the legal authority to manage the investments. Over the past 15 years, he systematically dismantled the trust. He falsified expense reports claiming the withdrawals were for your education and your medical care. He took out massive loans against the principal. He commingled the trust assets with his failing construction business. He used your mother's money to keep his company afloat, and when that was not enough, he used it to fund Susan and Chloe's luxurious lifestyle." The pieces of the puzzle began snapping together with sickening, violent clarity. The custom Porsche sitting in Chloe's driveway, the luxury European vacations, the endless stream of designer shoes, expensive jewelry, and country club memberships. My stepmother and my spoiled stepsister had not just been living off my father's income. They had been living off the money my dead mother had specifically left to protect me. They had literally stolen my mother's legacy to fund their own vanity, while forcing me to work myself to the bone to pay their household bills. The cruelty of it was so profound, so layered and absolute, that it defied basic human comprehension. They had sat at the dinner table with me for 2 decades, watching me struggle, watching me sacrifice my own happiness for their comfort, knowing they were bleeding my mother's memory dry. "But why today?" James asked, looking between Thomas and the documents. "Why run away on the exact day of her wedding? If he stole the money years ago, why coordinate this massive escape right now?" Thomas reached out and tapped a specific paragraph near the bottom of the second page. Article 4, Section B. Read the vesting clause, Abigail. I leaned over the table. The words blurred through my tears, but I forced my eyes to focus. I read the legal jargon, translating it perfectly in my accountant brain. The principal assets of the trust shall be held in careful stewardship until the beneficiary, Abigail Rose Sterling, reaches her 30th birthday, or upon the date of her first lawful marriage, whichever event shall occur first. Upon said event, the trustee shall present a full and complete financial accounting to the probate court, and the entirety of the assets shall be transferred into the direct control of the beneficiary. The words slammed into me like a freight train. Or upon the date of her first lawful marriage. Today was the vesting date. Today was the legal deadline. By walking down that aisle and signing a marriage certificate with James, I was legally triggering the immediate transfer of the trust. If my father had stayed in Chicago, if he had attended this wedding and smiled for the photographs, he would have been legally obligated to surrender $3.5 million to me by Monday morning. He would have been forced to present a full financial audit to a probate judge. The judge would have instantly seen that the accounts were completely empty. My father would have been arrested for gross breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement, and grand larceny. He could not stay, I whispered. The realization was sharp and freezing cold. He could not walk me down the aisle because walking me down the aisle meant handing over the money he had already stolen. Exactly, Thomas said. His expression was grim. He knew this day was coming for years. That is why he began taking out those massive fraudulent commercial loans under your name 6 months ago. He needed to build a war chest so he could flee the country before the wedding date arrived. He used your pristine credit to borrow millions of dollars from private investors, funneled all that fresh cash into offshore accounts, and booked a private flight out of the country before the sun even came up. He framed me, I said. I was no longer crying. The tears had completely stopped. My voice was dropping lower, finding a new terrifying center of gravity. Yes. Thomas agreed softly. He framed you. By setting you up as the sole guarantor of his fraudulent business loans, he ensured that when the banks and the investors realized the money was gone, they would come looking for you, not him. He knew the FBI would freeze your accounts today. He knew you would be completely paralyzed by the financial ruin. He orchestrated this massive financial collapse to drop squarely on your shoulders at the exact moment you were supposed to be getting married. You were meant to be the ultimate distraction. While you are sitting in an interrogation room trying to explain why your signature is on millions of dollars of fraudulent corporate debt, your father, Susan, and Chloe will be disappearing into a non-extradition country, living like royalty on the money your biological mother left for you. I stood completely still. The bridal suite, with its suffocating smell of white lilies and spilled champagne, seemed to fade away. I thought about the rehearsal dinner just 3 nights ago. I thought about Susan demanding that I pay for the extra imported roses, complaining that weddings were so terribly expensive. I thought about Chloe dramatically crying over her bridesmaid dress, forcing me to hand her my credit card for emergency alterations. I thought about my father raising his glass of wine, looking me directly in the eyes, and telling the entire room how proud he was of my success. They were not just celebrating a wedding. They were celebrating their escape. They were looking at this perfect scapegoat. They thought it was absolutely hilarious. They were bleeding my bank accounts dry for flowers and dresses, knowing that in less than 72 hours I would be left completely destitute and facing federal prison. Something deep inside my chest snapped. It was not a chaotic, loud breaking. It was the precise, quiet sound of a lock clicking into place. For 28 years, I had been the good daughter. I had been the peacekeeper. I had swallowed my pride, ignored the blatant favoritism, and worked myself into the ground to earn a scrap of affection from a man who viewed me as nothing more than a highly profitable financial instrument. I had allowed Susan to treat me like a servant. I had allowed Chloe to treat me like an open wallet. I had accepted their emotional abuse because I believed that family required sacrifice. But this was not family. This was a criminal syndicate operating out of a suburban kitchen. James reached out to touch my arm. Abby, I am so sorry. We need to call a lawyer. We need to call the police right now. We have to tell them you had nothing to do with this. I did not look at James immediately. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the trust document resting on the glass table. The document my mother had signed 20 years ago trying to protect her little girl from a monster. She had failed to protect me then. But I was not a little girl anymore. I reached up to my head. My fingers found the delicate, expensive pearl combs, holding my long bridal veil in place. The veil was incredibly heavy, trailing down my back and pooling on the floor. With one sharp, violent motion, I ripped the combs out of my hair. Several strands of hair tore loose, but I did not feel the pain. I let the veil drop to the marble floor. It looked like a discarded ghost. I turned to look at Thomas Caldwell. The elderly forensic accountant was watching me closely. He had seen hundreds of victims in his career. He had probably seen people collapse, scream, faint, and beg for mercy. But I was not going to beg. They made a massive mistake, I said. My voice did not shake. It was perfectly level, stripped of all sorrow, and replaced entirely by cold, calculated, absolute rage. Thomas tilted his head slightly. What mistake is that? They thought I was just a naive, obedient daughter, I said, staring directly into his eyes. They thought I was a quiet little girl who would just sit in a courtroom and cry while they spent my mother's money on a private beach. They thought I would be too paralyzed by the betrayal to fight back. I walked over to the vanity table and picked up the commercial promissory notes, the fraudulent guarantees, and the stolen trust documents. I stacked them together with meticulous professional precision. I squared the edges of this paper until they formed a perfect, flawless block. They forgot I am an accountant, I said, looking between James and Thomas. I spend 60 hours a week hunting down missing assets for massive corporations. I know exactly how numbers hide. I know how shell companies operate. I know how offshore wire transfers are processed. And I know exactly how to find them. James stood up straighter, his own anger mirroring mine. What do we do first? I looked at the digital clock on my phone. The phone that currently had $0 attached to it. It was 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon. The federal warrants would not be issued until the banks formally opened and reported the massive defaults on Monday morning. My father thought he had given himself a 48-hour head start. I thought he had left me completely trapped in this church with no way out. We have exactly 48 hours before the FBI freezes my entire life, I said. My father thinks he buried the master files. But he is a mechanic who runs a construction company. He is not a financial expert. He left a trail. He always leaves a trail. I grabbed my heavy lace wedding dress, gathering the voluminous fabric in my hands so I could walk without tripping. I did not care about the 200 guests waiting outside. I did not care about the wasted food or the ruined flowers. Thomas, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. You have the access codes to the investor portals. James, you have the keys to my car. We are leaving this church right now. We are going to track every single penny my father stole. And we are going to burn his escape route to the ground before he ever gets to spend it. We left the church through the side exit to avoid the 200 guests still waiting in the main sanctuary. James held my hand so tightly, his knuckles were completely white. He guided me into the passenger seat of his car, gently lifting the heavy layers of my lace wedding dress so the door would close. Thomas Caldwell followed closely behind us, his gray suit cutting a sharp figure against the bright Chicago afternoon. He got into his own car and followed us through the city streets. The drive to my apartment took 20 minutes. It was the longest, most suffocating car ride of my entire life. I stared out the window at the people walking their dogs, drinking coffee at sidewalk cafes, living their perfectly normal Saturday lives. They had no idea that my entire world had just been burned to the ground. When we walked into my small one-bedroom apartment, the reality of my situation crashed over me all over again. The living room was filled with cardboard boxes containing wedding decorations I had meticulously crafted by hand. There was a stack of thank you cards on the kitchen counter waiting to be mailed. I had planned a future that no longer existed. Thomas placed his thick leather briefcase on my small dining table. He did not waste time with apologies or false comfort. He was a man who dealt exclusively in hard, terrifying facts. Abigail. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Thomas said. His voice filled the small room, commanding my absolute attention. We are operating on a razor-thin timeline. Right now, it is Saturday afternoon. The federal banking authorities and the Federal Bureau of Investigation do not typically execute financial warrants over the weekend unless it involves national security. That gives us a small, fragile window. But on Monday morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the banks are going to open. The automated systems will flag the massive commercial defaults on those loans. By 9 o'clock, the compliance officers will see the offshore wire transfers. By 10 o'clock, the federal field office in Chicago will have your name, your social security number, and your home address on their desks as the sole legal guarantor of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. I felt all the blood drain from my face. Monday morning. I had less than 48 hours before I became a federal fugitive. They will freeze whatever assets you have left, Thomas continued relentlessly. They will issue subpoenas. They will likely come to this apartment with a warrant for your arrest. In the eyes of the law, your father is the victim of a failing business, and you are the financial mastermind who guaranteed the bad debt and vanished the money. Your father orchestrated this perfectly. He left you holding a ticking time bomb. James stepped forward, placing his hands firmly on the back of my chair. We will hire a defense attorney, James said loudly. We will fight this in court. We will prove her signatures were obtained under false pretenses. Thomas shook his head slowly. A defense attorney will cost you $100,000 just on retainer, which you do not have because your accounts are frozen. And proving coercion in federal court takes months, sometimes years. While you are fighting this in court, your father and your sister will be sitting on a private beach spending the money your biological mother left for you. You do not have months, Abigail. You have 48 hours to prove your innocence before the trap snaps shut. What do I need to do? I asked. My voice was perfectly steady. The tears were completely gone. I was no longer a heartbroken bride. I was an accountant preparing for the most important audit of my life. Thomas looked at me with a profound, quiet respect. I need the original digital ledger, he said. I need the metadata from your father's private servers. I have the printed documents he gave the investors, but printed paper can be manipulated. I need the raw digital footprint proving that he altered the final pages of those agreements after you signed them. I need the digital trail showing his exact computer terminal, executing the wire transfers to the offshore accounts. If we have the raw data, we can hand the FBI a complete wrapped package on Monday morning. We point the gun directly back at him. Then you hack into his system, James asked, looking at the forensic accountant with desperate hope. No, Thomas said flatly. Any evidence I obtain through illegal cyber intrusion would be entirely inadmissible in federal court. I cannot touch his servers. I looked down at my hands. My perfectly manicured fingernails, done specifically for a wedding reception that was never going to happen. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he always complained about technology. I thought about how he always relied on me to fix his computer problems. You do not need to hack into his system, I said softly. Thomas and James both looked at me in absolute silence. 3 years ago, I explained, looking directly into Thomas Caldwell's eyes. My father went on a fishing trip to a remote cabin in Michigan. It was the end of the month, and he forgot to approve the payroll for his construction crew. The workers were furious. He called me in a total panic because he could not figure out how to log into the corporate portal from his old laptop. I had to drive to his office, physically unlock the server room, and process the payroll myself, so his crew would get paid. I stood up from the dining table. After that incident, he asked me to create a failsafe. He asked me to build a secure remote administrative backdoor directly into the master server of his company. He wanted me to be able to access the core financial system from my own apartment in case he ever got locked out again. I built the backdoor. I assigned it top-tier administrative privileges. And because my father is completely financially illiterate, when it comes to software architecture, he never knew how to monitor it, and he certainly never knew how to close it. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Thomas Caldwell's weathered face. The forensic accountant understood exactly what I was saying. Are you telling me you have legal authorized administrative access to the core server of the company that just defrauded my investors out of millions of dollars? I am telling you, I am going to tear his entire financial life apart, I replied. Give me 5 minutes, I told James. I walked into my bedroom and stripped off the heavy, suffocating layers of my white lace wedding gown. The dress fell to the floor in a discarded heap. I stepped over it without a single ounce of regret. I pulled on a pair of gray sweatpants and an oversized college sweatshirt. I tied my hair back into a tight, messy knot. I was done playing the role of the beautiful, obedient victim. I carried my personal laptop out to the dining table and flipped open the screen. James had already started a pot of dark roast coffee in the kitchen. The smell of the brewing coffee grounded me, reminding me of all the late nights I had spent studying for my licensing exams. I cracked my knuckles and typed in the secure web address I had built 3 years ago. The login screen for the construction company server appeared on my monitor. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was a chance he had hired an outside information technology firm to wipe the servers before he fled the country. There was a chance the back door had been discovered and disabled. I typed in my administrative username. I carefully typed in the 32-character encrypted password I had memorized. I pressed the Enter key. A small loading circle spun on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the screen flashed green, access granted, master server connection established. I am in, I announced. The relief in the room was palpable. I immediately went to work. I bypassed the standard employee dashboard and dove straight into the root directory. As a corporate controller, I knew exactly where criminals tried to hide their sins. They never hid them in the main operating accounts. They hid them in the nested subfolders buried under layers of mundane daily transaction logs. For the next 6 hours, the 3 of us sat huddled around the small dining table. The sun went down outside my apartment window, plunging the city of Chicago into darkness. We did not turn on the overhead lights, working only by the harsh blue glow of my laptop monitor. James sat directly beside me, his shoulder pressed firmly against mine, refilling my coffee mug every time it ran empty. Thomas sat across the table taking meticulous notes on a legal pad as I called out file names and transaction hashes. I pulled up the master transaction ledger. It was a massive digital spreadsheet containing tens of thousands of individual line items. I filtered the data by date, starting from exactly 6 months ago, right when my father had first brought me those fraudulent guarantee documents to sign. "Look at this," I said, pointing to my screen. James and Thomas leaned in closer. Starting in late November, there is a massive influx of external capital. Millions of dollars pouring into the main operating account from private equity firms. But the money does not stay in the operating account for more than 48 hours. "Where does it go?" James asked, his eyes scanning the endless rows of numbers. I highlighted a series of recurring wire transfers. "It gets broken down into smaller increments, usually around $200,000 each, to avoid automatic federal banking flags. Then it gets wired to 4 different limited liability companies registered in Delaware." Delaware, Thomas noted, his pen scratching rapidly across his notepad. "The corporate secrecy capital of the United States. Delaware allows individuals to register shell companies without disclosing the names of the true owners. It is a black box for dirty money." "But he made a mistake," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "He used the company master server to execute the transfers, which means the server logged the destination routing numbers." I ran a reverse trace on the routing numbers. The data flooded my screen. The 4 Delaware shell companies were not keeping the money. They were acting as a digital washing machine, scrubbing the origin of the funds before immediately wiring the cash to a single private wealth management account located in the Cayman Islands. "He moved the entire stolen trust fund and the investor capital offshore," Thomas stated quietly. "It is a classic diversion tactic, but an offshore account is just a holding pen. He cannot easily spend that money in the United States without triggering IRS alarms. He had to convert it into a tangible asset. He had to buy something massive and completely unencumbered by debt." I pulled the transaction history for the offshore account, using an administrative bypass I had found in my father's personal email archive. My eyes darted across the screen, hunting for the final piece of the puzzle. It was 3 in the morning. My eyes were burning from staring at the monitor, but I refused to stop. I filtered the offshore data by the largest outgoing transactions. "There," I whispered, my breath caught in my throat. Exactly 7 days ago, while I was agonizing over the seating chart for my wedding reception, a single wire transfer of exactly $3 million was executed from the Cayman Islands account. The money was sent back into the United States. It was wired directly into a specialized real estate escrow account, located in Miami-Dade County, Florida. He bought property, James said, his voice rising with excitement. He bought a house in Florida. I quickly opened a new browser tab and navigated to the Miami-Dade County Public Property Appraiser website. Real estate transactions in Florida are public record. If a cash purchase of $3 million had closed in the last week, the deed would be legally recorded in the county database. I typed in the name of the escrow company and filtered the results by the purchase price. A single property record appeared on my screen. It was a massive, sprawling waterfront mansion located in an exclusive gated community in southern Florida. The property details listed a private boat dock, a swimming pool, and pristine ocean views. I clicked on the digital copy of the warranty deed to see who legally owned the house. The document loaded on my screen in high resolution. I felt a wave of absolute sickening betrayal wash over me all over again. The name listed as the sole exclusive owner of the $3 million waterfront mansion was not my father. It was not my stepmother. The warranty deed was registered entirely under the name Chloe Marie Sterling, my spoiled, unemployed younger sister, the sister who had complained that her bridesmaid dress was not flattering enough, the sister who had constantly mocked my frugal lifestyle. She was currently sitting in a $3 million mansion, legally owning an estate purchased entirely with the money stolen from my dead mother's trust fund and the fraudulent loans strapped to my name. They put the house in her name to protect it from my father's bankruptcy filings, Thomas explained, looking at the deed on the screen. Because she has no legal connection to the construction company, the federal authorities will not immediately look at her assets. It is brilliant, and it is entirely ruthless. I stared at Chloe's signature on the bottom of the Florida warranty deed. They thought they had completely outsmarted the system, and they thought I was too weak to ever uncover the truth. But I knew exactly where they were now. I knew exactly where the money was hiding. The hunt was over, and the war was about to begin. I stared at the glowing monitor, the digital image of the Florida warranty deed burning into my tired eyes. We had the destination. We had the routing numbers. We knew exactly where the stolen millions had gone. But Thomas Caldwell leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, his expression unreadable and deadly serious. He told me that digital footprints were easily manipulated in a federal court. A good defense attorney, the kind my father could now afford with $3 million of stolen cash, would argue that I had completely fabricated the digital trail to cover my own tracks. They would argue that I was the financial professional, the corporate controller, the only one smart enough to move money through offshore accounts. My father was just a simple construction boss. A jury would look at my resume and look at his calloused hands, and they would send me to federal prison. To completely destroy his narrative, to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that he was the mastermind, I needed the physical encryption keys. I needed the hardware tokens and the handwritten access codes that verified the true identity of the account holder. I closed my eyes and forced my exhausted brain to think. My father was a deeply paranoid man. He did not trust digital password managers. He did not trust cloud storage for his most sensitive secrets. He kept his most vital, incriminating information written down in a physical black leather ledger. I knew this because I had seen that ledger exactly once years ago when I was helping him audit his legitimate business expenses. "Where is it?" James asked, his voice steady and calm, anchoring me to the present moment. "It is in his floor safe," I replied, opening my eyes. "It is in the home office of the house in the suburbs, the house I have been paying the mortgage on for the past 5 years." Thomas looked at his watch. The bank formally foreclosed on that property at noon today, when the default triggers went off. The house is now officially bank property. The local police will have already placed a seal on the front door. Entering that house right now is trespassing. It is a crime. If you are caught, you will be arrested tonight, long before the FBI even issues their warrants on Monday morning. I looked at Thomas, and then I looked at James. I have spent my entire adult life following the rules, I said. I played by the book. I paid my taxes. I paid their debts. I sacrificed my own comfort to be a good, law-abiding daughter, and it bought me a front-row seat to my own execution. I am not playing by their rules anymore. James stood up and grabbed his car keys from the kitchen counter. Tell me the address, he said. We left Thomas at my apartment to continue pulling the transaction histories from the server. James and I drove through the dark, rain-slicked streets of Chicago, heading toward the wealthy suburbs. The drive took 45 minutes. I spent every single minute staring out the passenger window, feeling a strange mix of terror and absolute heartbreak. I was driving to the house I grew up in, the house where I had celebrated holidays, cooked Thanksgiving dinners, and desperately tried to earn the love of a mother and father who saw me as nothing more than a profitable asset. As we pulled into the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, I felt my stomach twist into painful knots. The street was lined with massive, beautiful homes, manicured lawns, and expensive cars parked in wide driveways. We parked 3 blocks away from my parents' house and walked the rest of the distance through the shadows, keeping our heads down and our footsteps light against the wet pavement. When we reached the edge of their property, I stopped and stared. The house was completely dark. No porch light. No warm glow from the living room windows. It looked abandoned, hollow, and dead. Taped to the heavy wooden front door was a bright orange piece of paper. It was a formal notice of foreclosure and a legal warning against trespassing, issued by the bank that had frozen my life just hours ago. James gently touched my elbow. "How do we get inside?" he whispered. "We cannot break a window. The neighbors will hear the glass shatter and call the police." I shook my head. "We do not need to break a window. My father is a creature of arrogant habit. He truly believes he is smarter than everyone else, but he is incredibly lazy." I walked quietly around the side of the house, my shoes sinking into the damp soil of the flower beds I used to weed for my mother on Saturday mornings. I moved toward the back patio. Near the sliding glass door, there was a heavy fake decorative stone sitting next to a potted fern. I bent down, turned the stone over, and pulled out the spare brass key. He had hidden it there 10 years ago and never bothered to change the locks or find a better hiding spot. He always assumed his suburban fortress was completely untouchable. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft metallic click. I pushed the sliding door open, and James and I stepped into the suffocating darkness of my childhood home. The air inside smelled stale like dust and old cologne. We did not dare turn on a single light switch. James used the tiny dim flashlight app on his phone, pointing it directly at the hardwood floor so the beam would not reflect against the windows. As we moved through the kitchen and into the main hallway, I could see the chaos they had left behind in their frantic escape. Drawers were pulled open and emptied. Picture frames were left shattered on the floor. They had stripped the house of every valuable item they could easily carry. Silverware, jewelry, small electronics. They had completely ransacked their own home like common thieves before running to the airport. I led James down the hallway toward my father's home office. The door was wide open. The room was a disaster of discarded papers and empty filing cabinets. But I was not interested in the filing cabinets. I walked straight over to the large, heavy oak desk sitting in the center of the room. "Help me move this," I whispered to James. We both put our weight against the heavy wood and pushed. The desk scraped loudly against the floorboards. I flinched, holding my breath, waiting to hear police sirens in the distance. The neighborhood remained perfectly silent. Once the desk was moved, I dropped to my knees and pulled back the thick Persian rug. Beneath the rug, embedded flush against the concrete foundation, was the circular steel dial of my father's floor safe. He never let anyone in the family know the combination. He told my mother it was a strict business security protocol. But I was the one who managed his corporate payroll. I was the one who balanced his books when he was too drunk or too lazy to do it himself. Years ago, I had found a small scrap of paper tucked inside his tax files, with a sequence of numbers written on it. Being an accountant, I memorized numbers instinctively. I placed my trembling fingers on the cold steel dial. I spun it to the right. 34. I spun it back to the left. 12. I spun it to the right again. 18. The numbers represented the date he had opened his construction company. He did not use my mother's birthday. He did not use my birthday. He used the date of the only thing he actually loved. The company he eventually used to destroy me. I grabbed the heavy metal handle and pulled. The thick steel door popped open with a heavy thud. James shined his dim phone light into the dark cavity of the safe. Inside, sitting perfectly untouched among stacks of empty cash envelopes, was a thick black leather ledger. Resting right on top of the ledger were two small encrypted hardware tokens. They looked like standard flash drives, but I knew exactly what they were. They were the physical authentication keys required to access the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I reached down and grabbed the ledger and the hardware tokens. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped them. I opened the black leather cover. The pages were filled with my father's messy, rushed handwriting. There were account numbers, routing details, and the login credentials for the Delaware shell companies. There were explicit notes documenting exactly how much money he was skimming from his investors each month. And then on the very last page, I saw a handwritten note that made my blood run completely cold. It was a list of my personal information, my social security number, the answers to my banking security questions, my exact corporate salary, and a bulleted timeline outlining exactly when the bank algorithms would flag my accounts for default. He had mapped out my financial execution down to the exact hour. "I have it," I whispered to James, clutching the heavy ledger tightly against my chest. "We have everything we need. Let us get out of here." We turned to leave the ruined office. We were exactly halfway down the dark hallway, moving quietly toward the back patio door, when a sudden jarring noise shattered the total silence of the empty house. It was my cell phone. I had forgotten to put it on silent. The ringing echoed off the bare walls, loud and piercing, sounding like a fire alarm in the dark. I froze in absolute panic, fumbling frantically in my sweatshirt pocket to grab the phone and silence the noise. I pulled the phone out. The bright screen illuminated my face in the dark hallway. The caller identification displayed a long, strange sequence of numbers. It was an international country code. James stopped beside me, his eyes wide with alarm. "Do not answer it," he whispered urgently. "They can track the connection." But I could not look away from the screen. A strange, terrifying calm suddenly washed over me. I looked at the black leather ledger in my hand. I looked at the ruined house around me. I thought about the $3 million mansion sitting on a waterfront in Florida, legally deeded to my spoiled younger sister. I pressed the green button and raised the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said. My voice was perfectly flat, completely devoid of any warmth or fear. "Abigail." My father's voice came through the speaker. It was crystal clear, completely relaxed, and utterly terrifying. He did not sound like a man who was running from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He sounded like a man who was sitting on a comfortable patio chair, enjoying the evening breeze. "I know you are looking around, Abby," my father said slowly. "I know you are probably sitting in your little apartment right now, crying over your frozen bank accounts. I know you are trying to figure a way out of this." I stood frozen in the dark hallway of the house I had paid for. I did not interrupt him. I let him speak. I needed to hear exactly how deep his sociopathy went. "You cannot win this one, sweetheart," he continued. His voice was patronizing, dripping with fake sympathy. "You are a smart girl. You have always been so practical and resilient. You know how to bounce back from hardship. That is why I knew you could handle this. I knew you were strong enough to take the fall. Your sister Chloe, she is fragile. She needs protection. But you, Abby, you are a survivor." I was actually trying to compliment me. He was framing my absolute destruction as a twisted compliment to my work ethic. I remained completely silent. "If you go to the police," my father warned, his tone dropping the fake sympathy and turning into sharp, cold steel. "If you try to tell them I forced you to sign those guarantees, I will make things infinitely worse for you. Before I left, I planted dozens of fabricated emails on your old computer at the construction office. I created a digital paper trail that makes it look like you masterminded the entire embezzlement scheme. You are the accountant, Abby. The federal prosecutors will easily believe that the brilliant corporate financial officer manipulated her poor, uneducated father into laundering money. He paused, letting the heavy threat sink in. I am giving you a way out, my father said generously. When the federal agents arrest you on Monday, I want you to take the plea deal. Do not fight them. Do not waste time pointing fingers at me. Just admit you made a terrible mistake and accept the charges. It is a white-collar crime. You have no criminal record. The judge will go easy on you. You will probably only serve 5 to 7 years in a minimum security federal camp, 5 to 7 years in federal prison. He was casually asking me to surrender my freedom, my reputation, and my entire future, so he could live in luxury. And if you do this for the family, my father added, his voice returning to that sickeningly warm tone. If you take the fall quietly, I promise I will take care of you. I will hire a lawyer to ensure you get placed in a comfortable facility, and I will put $1,000 in your prison commissary account every single month. You will not want for anything while you are inside. When you get out, I will even help you get back on your feet. We are family, Abby. We take care of each other. A burst of laughter echoed through the phone speaker. It was loud, shrill, and completely unmistakable. It was my younger sister, Chloe. Just accept it, sis, Chloe yelled from the background. Her voice was slightly slurred, like she had already been drinking heavily. You always said you wanted a long vacation from work. Consider prison a permanent sabbatical. We are already at this beach and the weather down here is absolutely gorgeous. Thank you for the house, by the way. The pool is incredible. I listened to her laugh. I listened to the faint sound of ocean waves crashing in the background through the phone connection. They were in Florida. They were sitting on the patio of the $3 million mansion bought with my dead mother's stolen trust fund. They were drinking margaritas and laughing at the thought of me sitting in a federal prison cell. Abby, my father said, cutting through Chloe's laughter. Do we have an understanding? You take the plea deal on Monday, and I make sure you are comfortable. If you try to fight me, I will ensure the prosecutors bury you under a mountain of fabricated evidence and you will serve 20 years. Make the smart choice. You are an accountant. Do the math. I stood in the darkness of the hallway. James was watching me closely, his jaw clenched with silent rage. The heavy black leather ledger felt warm in my hands. The physical proof of my father's entire criminal empire was pressing against my chest. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had left me completely defenseless, armed with nothing but my tears and a frozen bank account. I had no idea that I was standing in his own home. He had no idea that his secure floor safe was wide open. And he had absolutely no idea that I currently possessed the exact encryption keys required to access the millions of dollars he thought were safely hidden offshore. I finally took a deep breath. The stale air of the abandoned house filled my lungs. I have done the math, Father, I said. My voice was chillingly calm. It did not shake. It did not waver. I spoke with the precise, unyielding tone of a professional who was about to permanently close an account. What does that mean? My father asked. The confident swagger in his voice faltered just a fraction. He did not expect me to sound this calm. I expected me to be sobbing and begging for mercy. It means your calculations are completely, fundamentally flawed, I replied smoothly. You forgot to carry the balance. You forgot that when you build a house of cards on top of an accountant, the accountant knows exactly which card to pull to make the entire structure collapse. Abigail, do not do anything stupid, my father warned. His voice was suddenly tight with genuine anxiety. I am warning you. I have the evidence to put you away for a very long time. I am not going to prison, Father, I said quietly. But you should probably enjoy the beach while you still can. The weather in a federal penitentiary is not nearly as nice as the weather in Florida. I did not wait for his response. I did not wait for him to start screaming threats or demanding to know what I meant. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, instantly cutting off the connection. The silence rushed back into the dark hallway, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the calm right before a massive, devastating storm. I looked at James. His eyes were wide in the dim light of the phone flashlight. He pointed silently toward the back patio door. We needed to leave before my father realized what I had meant. and called the local police to report a break-in at his foreclosed house just to spite me. We slipped out through the sliding glass door, locking it carefully behind us. I placed the fake decorative stone exactly where I had found it. We walked briskly through the damp, manicured lawns of the wealthy suburban neighborhood, sticking to the deep shadows until we reached James' car. We got inside, and James immediately locked the doors and started the engine. As we drove away from the house I had spent 5 years paying for, I opened the black leather ledger on my lap. I turned on the small overhead reading light in the car. I traced my fingers over the handwritten access codes, the routing numbers, and the encrypted login protocols for the Delaware shell companies. My father was absolutely right about one thing. I am a highly capable, incredibly resilient corporate professional. I know how to adapt to a crisis. But he made a fatal error in judgment. He thought he could use my sense of responsibility to trap me. He did not realize that I could use my professional expertise to completely dismantle his entire existence. I wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial chess. He thought he had already achieved checkmate by leaving the board. But the game was not over. It was just beginning. And armed with the master keys to his entire illicit empire, I was about to execute a legal and financial maneuver that would strip him of every single thing he valued, trap him in his own web of lies, and reclaim the legacy my mother had left to protect me. The drive back to my apartment was suffocatingly quiet. James gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his eyes locked on the dark, rain-slicked roads of Chicago. I sat in the passenger seat with the heavy black leather ledger resting on my lap. My fingers traced the worn edges of the cover. This book contained the complete financial anatomy of my father's criminal empire. It held the routing numbers, the offshore account logins, and the digital encryption keys that controlled millions of stolen dollars. But more importantly, it held the absolute proof of his betrayal. We parked in the underground garage of my building and took the elevator up to my floor in total silence. I felt a strange, terrifying calm settling over my mind. The shock and the heartbreak of being abandoned on my wedding day had completely burned away. I was no longer a grieving bride. I was a corporate financial officer preparing for the most brutal audit of my entire life. When we walked into my apartment, Thomas Caldwell was sitting at my small dining table exactly where we had left him. The elderly forensic accountant looked up as I placed the heavy leather ledger directly in front of him. I pulled the 2 encrypted hardware tokens from my pocket and set them down next to the book. Thomas let out a slow, heavy breath. He looked at the ledger, and then he looked at me with a profound sense of professional respect. I told Thomas that my father had called me while we were inside the foreclosed house. I told him about the threats. I explained how my father planned to fabricate a digital paper trail to frame me as the sole mastermind behind the massive embezzlement scheme. I repeated the exact words my father had used, offering to put money in my prison commissary account if I simply took the plea deal and let him live in peace on a private beach in Florida. Thomas folded his hands on the table. He did not look surprised. He told me that this was the standard operating procedure for a financial predator cornered by his own greed. But Thomas also delivered a harsh dose of reality. He warned me that simply handing this ledger over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation would not save me by Monday morning. I explained that federal investigations are incredibly slow and deeply bureaucratic. If I walked into a field office and handed them the physical evidence, they would take months to verify the data. They would still freeze my personal bank accounts. They would still issue a warrant for my arrest, based on the forged commercial guarantees. I would spend the next 2 or 3 years completely bankrupt fighting to stay out of a federal penitentiary, while my father used the stolen millions to hire elite defense attorneys to drag the case out until I was completely broken. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. I told Thomas that I refused to rot in a jail cell while the federal government slowly processed paperwork. I refused to let my mother and my sister enjoy a $3 million waterfront mansion bought with my stolen legacy. I needed a strategy that was faster and far more aggressive than a criminal investigation. Thomas smiled a grim, calculating smile. He pointed to the thick probate document we had reviewed earlier in the day, the Catherine Sterling Irrevocable Trust. He reminded me of the vesting clause. The trust was legally mandated to transfer to my direct control on the day of my first lawful marriage. Because today was my wedding day, the vesting clause had been legally triggered the moment the sun came up. It did not matter that the ceremony was canceled. The legal date had arrived. The money my biological mother had left for me was now legally and unequivocally my exclusive property. Thomas explained the loophole. Because my father had commingled the stolen investor capital with my stolen trust fund, and because he had used those commingled funds to purchase the Florida mansion, the property itself was a product of stolen inheritance. We did not need to wait for a criminal prosecutor to file fraud charges. We could attack them through civil litigation immediately. Thomas pulled his cell phone from his jacket pocket and dialed a number. It was 4:00 in the morning, but the man on the other end answered on the second ring. Thomas introduced him over the speakerphone as Robert Callahan. Robert was a bulldog federal litigator who specialized in high-stakes asset recovery and emergency corporate injunctions. Thomas quickly briefed Robert on the situation. I explained the forged commercial guarantees, the drained trust fund, and the offshore wire transfers used to buy the Florida estate. Robert Callahan's voice crackled through the phone speaker sharp and entirely awake. He told us that because the trust legally vested to me today, we had the grounds to file an ex parte emergency injunction in federal court, first thing Monday morning. An ex parte injunction is a highly aggressive legal maneuver where a judge grants an emergency restraining order without notifying the other party. Robert explained that if we could present undeniable digital proof that the Florida mansion was purchased using my stolen trust assets, a federal judge would instantly sign an order freezing the property and placing it under a court-appointed receivership. My father and my sister would be legally locked out of their own mansion, unable to sell it, borrow against it, or even step foot on the property without facing immediate arrest for violating a federal court order. But Robert gave us one massive condition. He needed absolute irrefutable proof tying Chloe and my father directly to the active management of the offshore accounts. The physical ledger was excellent evidence, but a clever defense attorney could argue that I had stolen the ledger and was orchestrating the transfers myself. Robert told me I needed to catch them with their digital fingerprints directly on the money. I needed them to log and claim ownership of the funds and leave an undeniable electronic trail that led straight to their luxury beach chairs in Florida. I ended the call with Robert Callahan and looked at my computer screen. I knew exactly what I had. I opened the black leather ledger and typed the incredibly complex master passwords into the offshore banking portal. I inserted the encrypted hardware token into the side of my laptop. The security software authenticated the hardware, and the main dashboard of the Cayman Islands wealth management account loaded on my screen. The numbers were staggering. There were millions of dollars sitting in holding accounts waiting to be deployed. I clicked on the Pending Transactions tab. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was an outgoing wire transfer scheduled to clear on Monday morning for $800,000. The payment reference explicitly listed the purchase of a luxury yacht in Miami. They were literally buying a boat to celebrate my financial execution. My first emotional instinct was to instantly change the master passwords, lock them out of the accounts, and transfer the money to a secure escrow holding. But the accountant inside my brain stopped my hands from typing. Locking them out would only alert my father that I had compromised his system. He would immediately panic, destroy his laptops. I looked at James, who was watching my screen with quiet intensity. I told him that I was going to use my sister as the bait. My father was paranoid and cautious, but Chloe was greedy, entitled, and completely financially illiterate. Chloe did not understand banking compliance laws. She did not understand the intricate mechanics of wire fraud or federal asset tracking. She only understood that she wanted her luxury yacht, and she wanted her money immediately. She was the weakest link in their criminal chain, and I was going to exploit her arrogance to burn them all to the ground. I opened a secondary window on my laptop and accessed the administrative backend of the Delaware shell company that legally owned the offshore bank account. I used the corporate controller software I had utilized for years in my own career to draft a highly sophisticated, incredibly realistic security alert. I spoofed the email address to make it look exactly like it was coming from the private compliance division of the Cayman Islands wealth management firm. I typed the email with cold, clinical precision. I addressed it directly to Chloe using the contact information my father had registered under the shell company profile. The subject line read, "Urgent action required. Mandatory identity verification to release pending funds." I crafted the body of the email using standard intimidating banking jargon. I wrote that the International Compliance Department had placed a temporary security hold on the $800,000 outgoing wire transfer for the yacht purchase, due to routine anti-money laundering protocols. I stated that in order to release the funds and finalize the purchase of the vessel, the primary account beneficiary had to manually verify their identity and accept full legal liability for the capital transfer. I embedded a secure hyperlink into the bottom of the email. The link did not actually go to the offshore bank. It routed directly to a secure tracking server that I had just spun up on my laptop. When Chloe clicked the link, it would prompt her to type in her unique password. More importantly, it would present her with a digital document titled Declaration of Beneficial Ownership. I wrote the terms and conditions of the digital document myself. It explicitly stated that by clicking accept, the user legally swore under penalty of perjury that they were the sole exclusive owner of the offshore funds. It stated that the user took full and complete legal responsibility for the origin of the money. It was a digital confession wrapped in boring, tedious corporate language. I knew for an absolute fact that Chloe would never bother to read the fine print. She had spent her entire life ignoring the hard work and skipping straight to the reward. She would just scroll to the bottom, type her password, and click accept, so she could go back to drinking margaritas on her new patio. But the trap was even deeper than a simple confession. I programmed the tracking server to capture the exact internet protocol address, the physical global positioning system coordinates, and the device identification metadata. The absolute second she clicked the button, it would pinpoint her exact location in Florida down to the square meter. I reviewed the spoofed email one last time. It looked flawless. It looked like a terrifying, legitimate threat to her luxury lifestyle. I knew my mother and my father would be asleep. It was nearly dawn on Sunday morning. But Chloe was always awake at this hour, constantly scrolling through social media, obsessed with her digital image. I took a deep breath. I thought about the text message my father had sent me telling me I was on my own. I thought about my mother demanding I pay for her expensive flowers. I thought about my sister laughing on the phone, telling me to enjoy my time in a federal prison while she sat on the beach. They had thrown me to the wolves without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. I hovered my mouse over the send button. James placed his hand gently over mine. He looked at me, his eyes full of unwavering support, and he nodded. I clicked send. The email vanished from my outbox, speeding through the digital void toward Florida. The trap was officially set. Now there was nothing left to do but sit in the dark, drink stale coffee, and wait for my sister to blindly walk into the very cage they had built for me. I sat perfectly still in the dim light of my apartment. The digital clock on the bottom right corner of my computer monitor read 6 in the morning. Outside my window, the city of Chicago was slowly waking up. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gray. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen for so many hours, but I refused to blink. James was sitting right beside me, holding my left hand. His grip was warm and steady. Thomas Caldwell sat across the table, drinking his 4th cup of black coffee. We were hunting a ghost. We had sent the spoofed email to my younger sister Chloe just before dawn. Now we had to wait for her to wake up in her stolen $3 million mansion in Florida. I knew her habits. I knew she always slept with her phone right next to her pillow. I knew the very first thing she did every single morning was check her notifications. She was addicted to the validation of social media. She was addicted to the image of wealth that she had not earned. I prayed that her vanity would be her ultimate downfall. Thomas had pulled the details of the pending wire transfer. $800,000. My father was not just buying a boat. He was buying a massive luxury yacht. He was planning to sail the family straight into international waters before the federal authorities even knew he was gone. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. I thought he could use my signature to steal millions, drain my biological mother's trust fund, and leave me to take the fall while he escaped to a tropical paradise. He had meticulously calculated every single detail except one. He had entrusted the keys to his offshore fortune to his spoiled, financially illiterate golden child. Chloe did not understand the intricate laws of banking compliance. She did not know what an anti-money laundering hold was. She only knew that she wanted her luxury yacht, and she wanted it today. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing chime echoed from my laptop speakers. The tracking server I had built specifically for the spoofed email suddenly lit up with activity. A bright green line of code scrolled rapidly across the dark terminal window. My heart slammed against my ribs. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the dining table so hard my fingers ached. She opened the email, I whispered. My voice was tight with anticipation. James squeezed my shoulder. Thomas set his coffee mug down and walked around the table to stand right behind my chair. We watched the screen in absolute silence. The tracking software showed that the email had been opened on a mobile device. I could vividly picture Chloe lying in a massive bed with expensive silk sheets squinting at her phone screen. I knew exactly what she was feeling. She was annoyed. She was deeply irritated that a bank would dare to interrupt her perfect vacation with tedious paperwork. 10 agonizing seconds passed. The silence in the apartment was completely suffocating. Then the server chimed again. A massive flood of data poured onto my screen. She clicked the secure link, I said. The digital trap was snapping shut. The link routed her directly to my secure server, which was disguised perfectly as the offshore bank's compliance portal. The screen prompted her to enter her master password to verify her identity. If she typed in that password, she would bypass the final security wall. If she typed in that password, she would be presented with the declaration of beneficial ownership. I held my breath. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds. Then the terminal window flashed a bright solid green. She entered the password, I announced. The relief in my voice was overwhelming. We have the credentials. But the password was not enough. Robert Callahan, the federal litigator, had been very clear. We needed a legally binding confession. We needed Chloe to electronically sign the declaration swearing under penalty of perjury that she and my father were the sole exclusive owners of the stolen funds. The tracking software showed that Chloe was currently viewing the legal declaration. It was 4 pages of dense, intimidating legal jargon. I knew she was not reading a single word of it. She was just scrolling straight to the bottom, looking for the accept button. She wanted to release the funds so she could go buy her yacht. She wanted to drink champagne on the deck of a boat paid for with my destroyed life. Come on, Chloe. I whispered to the screen. Be exactly who you have always been. Be lazy. Take the shortcut. The server chimed a third and final time. A high-pitched, ringing sound that felt like absolute victory. A new digital file automatically downloaded onto my desktop. I opened it immediately. It was the complete verified electronic signature log. Chloe Marie Sterling had checked the box. She had accepted the terms. She had legally confessed. But the trap gave us far more than just a signature. Because she had clicked the link on her mobile phone, the tracking software had captured her exact digital footprint. I pulled up the metadata report. I had her precise global positioning system coordinates. I had the physical media access control address of her mobile device. I had the internet protocol address of the wireless network inside the Florida mansion. I mapped these coordinates on a digital globe. The bright red dot landed exactly on top of the $3 million waterfront estate in Miami-Dade County. We have them, I said, looking up at Thomas and James. We have the absolute irrefutable proof. Thomas did not waste a single second. He pulled out his phone and called Robert Callahan. The federal litigator answered immediately. He had been waiting by his phone all morning. I attached the digital confession, the metadata report, and the verified location coordinates to a secure email and sent it directly to Robert's office. I listened to Robert speaking through the speakerphone. His voice was brimming with fierce professional energy. He told us that this was the smoking gun. This was the exact leverage he needed to force a judge's hand. Because the stolen funds belonged to my biological mother's, a trust that legally vested to me the moment my wedding day began, Robert could file an emergency ex parte injunction in federal court. Robert explained that he was waking up a federal judge right now. He was submitting the emergency filing before the normal court hours even began. The legal argument was incredibly simple and completely devastating. Chloe and Richard had confessed to owning funds that were mathematically proven to be stolen from my trust account. Therefore, the money used to buy the Florida mansion and the money sitting in the offshore holding accounts belonged entirely to me. We sat in my apartment and waited while the federal legal system did its job. It was a completely different kind of waiting. It was no longer the terrifying wait of a victim anticipating a disaster. It was the powerful, patient wait of someone watching a trap slowly close around a predator. 2 hours passed. The sun was fully shining through my apartment windows, now casting a warm golden light across the dining table. My phone finally rang. It was Robert Callahan. I put him on speakerphone. "We got it," Robert said. His voice echoed through the quiet room. "The federal judge just signed the emergency injunction. Every single asset connected to your father and your sister has been officially frozen by the United States government. The offshore accounts are locked. The shell companies are seized. The deed to the Florida mansion has a federal lien placed on it. They cannot spend a single dime. They cannot move a single inch. It is completely over." I let out a long, trembling breath. James wrapped his arms around me and pulled into a tight embrace. Thomas Caldwell simply nodded, a look of deep, profound satisfaction on his weathered face. We had done it. We had beaten my father at his own twisted game, 1,000 miles away in the bright, humid sunshine of southern Florida. My family had no idea that their entire world had just been legally vaporized. I could picture the scene with absolute crystal clarity. I knew exactly what my father was doing. He was standing on the polished wooden docks of an exclusive Miami marina. The salty ocean breeze was blowing through his hair. I was wearing expensive sunglasses and a linen shirt, bought with money he had stolen from his own daughter. He was looking at a massive, gleaming white luxury yacht. The boat was going to be their ticket to absolute freedom. It was going to carry them away from the consequences of their crimes and into a life of endless, unaccountable wealth. My mother, Susan, was likely standing right beside him. She was probably wearing a designer sundress and holding an expensive leather handbag. She was probably looking down at the marina staff with that same condescending, arrogant expression she had always used on me. She believed she had finally won. She believed she had successfully discarded the spare child and secured a perfect, wealthy future for her true family. And Chloe was there too. Chloe was probably busy taking photographs of the yacht for her social media accounts, posing and smiling, completely oblivious to the fact that her digital signature from just a few hours ago had just signed their collective death warrants. My father was a man who loved the theatrical performance of wealth. He loved to feel powerful. I knew exactly how he would handle the final transaction. He would not just sign a piece of paper quietly. He would make a show of it. He would walk into the luxurious, air-conditioned office of the yacht broker. He would sit down in a comfortable leather chair. He would smile that charming, manipulative smile that he used to convince me to sign those fraudulent commercial loans. The yacht broker would place the final sales contract on the desk. The broker would inform my father that the offshore wire transfer had unfortunately been delayed by a temporary compliance hold. The broker would ask for a secondary form of immediate payment to secure the vessel and release the title. My father would not panic. He would simply reach into his expensive leather wallet. He would pull out his heavy black metal credit card. The card tied to the primary operating account of the Delaware Shell Company. The card that had unlimited purchasing power backed by millions of dollars of stolen cash. He would hand that black card to the yacht broker with a look of supreme, unbothered arrogance. He would probably ask the broker to open a bottle of vintage champagne to celebrate the purchase. He would turn to my mother and my sister and promise them that they would be sailing into the sunset by the afternoon. The broker would take the heavy black card. The broker would slide it into the credit terminal on the desk. The machine would beep, processing the transaction. It would send a digital signal through the global banking network attempting to authorize a massive charge against an account that my father believed was completely secure. My father would lean back in his chair waiting for the receipt to print. He would be thinking about how perfectly his plan had worked. He would be thinking about how I was probably sitting in an interrogation room in Chicago taking the blame for his entire criminal enterprise. But the receipt would not print. The terminal would emit a harsh, sharp buzzing sound. The yacht broker would look down at the digital screen, a deep frown forming on his face. The broker would try to process the card a second time, thinking it was just a simple connection error. The machine would buzz again. The broker would look up at my father, the polite customer service smile vanishing completely from his face. I could see the exact moment the illusion shattered. I could see the blood draining from my father's confident face. I could see the confusion spreading to my mother and my sister. The yacht broker would turn the small digital terminal around so my father could see the screen for himself. The screen would not show an approved transaction. It would not show a minor banking error. The bright red letters on the digital display would spell out the absolute end of my father's criminal empire. The terminal would flash two simple, devastating words. Declined. Accounts frozen. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the city of Chicago, casting a pale gray light through the windows of my small apartment. I sat at my dining table staring at the computer screen with a level of exhaustion that went far beyond physical fatigue. It was a bone-deep weariness, the kind that settles into your soul after you spend your entire life trying to earn the love of people who only saw you as a financial asset. James was sitting next to me. His hand was resting gently on my shoulder, providing a warm, steady anchor in a room that felt entirely too cold. Thomas Caldwell, the forensic accountant who had helped me uncover the absolute truth, was standing near the kitchen counter. He had spent the last 2 hours on the phone with his federal law enforcement contacts in Miami, coordinating the final details of the asset freeze and the impending arrests. The trap we had meticulously set during the darkest hours of the night was about to snap shut. Thomas ended his phone call and walked over to the table. He did not look tired. He looked like a man who was about to deliver the final blow to a criminal enterprise. He told me that the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local Miami-Dade Marine Patrol were actively moving into position. Because my father was attempting to purchase a vessel capable of traveling into international waters, the authorities were treating him as an extreme flight risk. They were not going to politely knock on the door of the waterfront mansion. They were going to swarm the marina and take them all down in plain sight. Thomas explained that the lead federal agent, a man named Special Agent Miller, had secured a warrant to commandeer the closed-circuit security cameras at the luxury marina through a secure federal portal. Thomas was able to link my laptop monitor directly to the live surveillance feed. We were not going to miss a single second of their downfall. The dark screen on my laptop flickered, and then a crystal-clear high-definition video feed appeared. The contrast between my cramped, chilly Chicago apartment and the scene on the monitor was incredibly jarring. The video showed a stunningly beautiful morning in South Florida. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue. The water in the marina was a pristine, sparkling turquoise. Palm trees swayed gently in the warm ocean breeze. Docked along the wooden piers were dozens of massive multi-million-dollar yachts. It was a picture of absolute, unadulterated luxury. And walking right down the center of the main dock, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire world was about to be violently ripped apart, was my biological family. I leaned closer to the screen, feeling a cold, hard knot form in the center of my stomach. My father was leading the group. He was wearing pristine white linen pants and an expensive custom-tailored silk shirt. He walked with the arrogant, entitled swagger of a man who believed he had completely outsmarted the federal government, the banking system, and his own daughter. He looked like a billionaire on a permanent vacation, completely untroubled by the fact that he had stolen my biological mother's legacy and tried to send me to a federal penitentiary. My stepmother Susan was walking right beside him. She was wearing a wide-brimmed designer sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and an elegant floral sundress. She was carrying a leather handbag that easily cost more than my first car. She was smiling pointing excitedly at the massive white yacht waiting at the end of the pier, acting as if she had personally earned every single penny required to purchase it. Trailing a few steps behind them was my younger sister, Chloe. She was exactly where I expected her to be, completely absorbed in her cell phone. She was wearing designer sandals and a ridiculously expensive beach cover-up. She was holding the heavy brass keys to the $3 million waterfront mansion in her left hand, swinging them back and forth like a toy. Just 24 hours earlier, she had legally confessed to owning millions of dollars in stolen trust funds simply because she was too lazy and too arrogant to read the fine print on a security verification email. She thought she was an untouchable, wealthy heiress. She had absolutely no idea that she had personally signed her own federal indictment. I watched the three of them walk into the air-conditioned, glass-walled office of the yacht broker located at the very edge of the marina. The camera angle automatically shifted, providing us with a perfect view of the interior office. We could not hear the audio through the security feed, but we did not need to. The body language told the entire story with devastating clarity. I saw my father sit down in a plush leather chair in front of the broker's mahogany desk. He leaned back, crossed his legs, and pulled out his heavy black metal credit card. It was the card tied directly to the offshore shell company. The card backed by the stolen money. I saw the yacht broker take the card with a polite, professional smile and slide it into the electronic payment terminal on his desk. James squeezed my shoulder tightly. We knew exactly what was happening in that room. We knew that the payment terminal was currently trying to authorize a massive transaction against accounts that the United States government had completely frozen just 3 hours ago. The yacht broker's polite smile instantly vanished. He tapped the digital screen of the payment terminal, looking slightly confused. He took the heavy black card out, wiped it on his sleeve, and swiped it a second time. My father remained leaning back in his chair, completely unbothered. He probably thought it was a simple bank error. He probably thought he could just call his offshore wealth manager and clear up the technical glitch in 5 minutes. He had absolutely no idea that his offshore wealth manager had already surrendered all of his financial records to the federal authorities. The broker shook his head and turned the payment terminal around so my father could see the screen for himself. I watched my father's posture change in a fraction of a second. His legs uncrossed. He leaned forward abruptly, pointing an angry finger at the machine. He was clearly arguing, demanding that the broker try the transaction a third time. Susan stopped admiring the expensive boat models displayed on the office wall and walked over to the desk. Her face pinched into a sour, entitled scowl. She was clearly demanding to know why they were being delayed. She wanted to board her luxury yacht and drink her vintage champagne. Then my father pulled out his cell phone. He frantically dialed a number, pacing back and forth across the glass office, pressing the phone tightly to his ear. I knew he was calling the Cayman Islands. I knew he was listening to an automated message stating that the account number was no longer in service. The absolute panic began to visibly set into his bones. His face turned a sickly, pale shade of gray. He ran his hands through his carefully styled hair, destroying his sophisticated facade. He realized the money was completely gone. He realized his perfect escape route was dead. But before my father could even begin to process the magnitude of his financial collapse, the real nightmare finally arrived. On the exterior marina camera feed, I saw them coming. 4 unmarked black sports utility vehicles tore into the marina parking lot, completely blocking the main exit gates. 3 marked Miami-Dade police cruisers followed right behind them, their red and blue lights flashing brilliantly against the bright morning sun. The vehicles did not park neatly in the designated spaces. They jumped the curbs and stopped at aggressive diagonal angles, forming an impenetrable steel barricade around the docks. Dozens of federal agents and heavily armed local police officers poured out of the vehicles. They were wearing dark tactical vests, with bright yellow letters spelling out FBI across their chests. They moved with terrifying speed and absolute military precision. They did not jog casually. They sprinted down the wooden dock, their heavy boots pounding against the planks, heading straight for the glass office at the end of the pier. Inside the office, my father turned around and saw the army of law enforcement officers charging directly toward him. I watched his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror. He dropped his cell phone. It shattered against the hard tile floor. He took one stumbling step backward, tripping over his own feet like a frightened child. He looked frantically toward the back door of the office, but there was nowhere left to run. The marina was surrounded by water, and he was completely trapped in a cage of his own making. The federal agents burst through the glass doors of the yacht broker's office. At that exact moment, Thomas pressed a button on his keyboard, syncing the audio from the lead agent's body camera directly to my laptop speakers. The sound flooded my quiet Chicago apartment. Richard Sterling, a tall, broad-shouldered federal agent, shouted, his voice booming with earth-shattering authority. "Put your hands in the air and step away from the desk right now. Do not move another inch." My father froze completely. His arrogant billionaire swagger was entirely gone. He raised his shaking hands into the air. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked and failed. He sounded pathetic, weak, and entirely broken. "What is this?" he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "There must be some kind of mistake. I am just buying a boat. You have the wrong man. I demand to know what is going on." "We do not have the wrong man," the agent replied, stepping forward and grabbing my father violently by the shoulders. "Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal money laundering. Turn around and put your hands behind your back right now." The agent spun my father around and slammed him face first against the thick glass wall of the office. The impact echoed loudly through the microphone. My father let out a loud, pathetic yelp of pain. He squirmed against the glass, screaming that he needed a lawyer, screaming that his civil rights were being violated, screaming that he had millions of dollars and would sue every single person in the room. The federal agent ignored his tantrum entirely. He pulled my father's arms forcefully behind his back and snapped cold, heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists, locking them with a sharp, terrifying click. I sat at my dining table, watching the man who had destroyed my childhood, who had stolen my biological mother's legacy, and who had tried to send me to a federal prison on my wedding day, get publicly reduced to a crying, helpless criminal. A deep, profound sense of justice washed over my soul. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after drowning underwater for 28 years. Susan was backing away into the far corner of the office, holding her hands up in front of her face as if to shield herself from the reality of the situation. She was trembling violently, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. When two female federal agents approached her with their handcuffs ready, Susan instantly shattered. The wealthy, sophisticated country club wife vanished completely. She was replaced by a desperate, selfish coward who was perfectly willing to destroy her own husband just to save her own skin. "I did not do anything," Susan screamed, sobbing hysterically, as the agents grabbed her arms and pulled them behind her back. "It was all him. Richard did everything. He handles all the money. I do not know anything about any offshore accounts or stolen trust funds. He told me his construction business was doing great. He lied to me too. Please do not arrest me. I am a victim here. He made me come on this trip. I am innocent. You cannot take me to jail." My father turned his head as far as he could against the glass wall, staring at his wife in absolute devastated horror. "Susan, what are you doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking with pure betrayal. "You knew exactly where the money came from. You picked out the house in Florida. You picked out the boat. Do not do this to me. Do not turn on me." "I told you to stop!" Susan shrieked back at him, her tears completely ruining her expensive makeup. "I told you that plain, boring little accountant daughter of yours was going to figure it out eventually. You ruined my life, Richard. I am not going to a federal prison for you. I am not wearing an orange jumpsuit. Tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with this. Tell them I am innocent." The federal agents ignored her pathetic theatrical performance. They locked the handcuffs securely around Susan's wrists and loudly read her the Miranda rights. She continued to sob and beg, screaming that her delicate health could not survive a holding cell. I sat in my apartment watching the woman who had treated me like absolute dirt for 2 decades cry like a spoiled toddler. She had gladly spent millions of dollars of my money, and the absolute moment the bill finally came due, she tried to hand it right back to the man she claimed to love. There is absolutely no honor among thieves. But But the most incredibly satisfying moment of the entire morning belonged exclusively to Chloe. Chloe had been standing outside on the wooden dock when the raid began, entirely too absorbed in her cell phone to notice the flashing police lights or the armed agents rushing past her. A team of agents surrounded her, completely blocking her path to the luxury yacht. Chloe finally looked up from her digital screen, a deep, highly offended scowl crossing her face. She actually rolled her eyes at the heavily armed federal agents. "Excuse me," Chloe said, in that familiar nasal, whining voice of hers. "You are standing in my way. My family just bought this boat, and we have a very tight schedule to keep. We are going to the Bahamas. Please move out of my way right now." Chloe Marie Sterling, a tall, broad-shouldered FBI agent, asked, stepping directly into her personal space and towering over her. "Yes, that is me," Chloe replied, crossing her arms indignantly and tapping her expensive sandal against the wood. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" "I am Special Agent Miller," the man said, pulling a folded piece of white paper from his tactical vest. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and accessory to money laundering. Furthermore, I have a federal seizure order for the waterfront property deeded in your name, located in Miami-Dade County. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately." Chloe stared at him like he was speaking a completely foreign language. The sheer absolute entitlement in her brain simply could not process the fact that she was being held accountable for her actions. She let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, shaking her head as if the federal agent had just told a bad joke. "You are completely insane," Chloe said, stepping backward and clutching her designer purse tightly against her chest. "I do not know anything about money laundering. I am just a boutique receptionist. I do not own any property in Florida. My dad bought that house for me as a gift. You are making a massive mistake, and my father is going to sue you for harassing me. I want to speak to a manager." Agent Miller did not smile. He pulled a heavy digital tablet from his vest and tapped the screen. "We have a verified encrypted electronic document signed directly from your personal mobile device at exactly 6:00 yesterday morning," he said, his voice cold, flat, and entirely unyielding. "You digitally signed a declaration of beneficial ownership, swearing under absolute penalty of perjury that you are the sole exclusive owner of the offshore funds used to purchase the Florida property. You accepted full legal and criminal liability for the origin of the money. You confessed to the crime, Miss Sterling." Chloe's jaw dropped completely open. The artificial tan seemed to drain right out of her face. She remembered the spoofed email. She remembered clicking the accept button just so she could clear the annoying notification from her screen and go back to sleep. She realized in that exact, terrifying second that she had legally confessed to a massive federal crime simply because she was too lazy to read the terms and conditions. "That was a trick!" Chloe screamed, her voice pitching into a hysterical, frantic wail that echoed across the marina. "It was a stupid email. I did not read it. I never read those things. I just clicked the button so I could buy my boat. You cannot arrest me for not reading an email. That is not fair. I want my lawyer. I want my daddy." The agent grabbed her arm firmly, spinning her around. "Your father is currently being placed in the back of a police cruiser, Miss Sterling. And your boat belongs to the federal government now. Turn around and comply." Chloe threw a massive, violent tantrum. She kicked her feet and tried to pull her arms away, acting exactly like a spoiled child throwing a fit in a grocery store checkout line. The agents quickly and efficiently overpowered her, snapping the heavy steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. One of the agents reached over and confiscated her expensive designer handbag. He reached inside the leather purse and pulled out the heavy brass keys to the $3 million waterfront mansion. He dropped the keys into a clear plastic evidence bag and zipped it shut. "No," Chloe shrieked, watching the keys disappear into the plastic bag. "That is my house. You cannot take my house. My dad bought that for me. Give it back to me right now. All my expensive makeup is in there. All my designer clothes are in there. You cannot do this to me. I am a victim." The agent attached the evidence bag to his utility belt. "Your new clothes will be provided for you by the county jail," he said flatly. "Let us go." They marched Chloe down the long wooden dock toward the waiting police cruisers. She was sobbing hysterically, her expensive designer sunglasses falling off her face and clattering onto the wooden planks. She looked completely broken, stripped of all her stolen wealth, and forced to face the brutal, uncompromising reality of her own greed and ignorance. I sat in my apartment watching the video feed with an emotion I had never allowed myself to feel before. Absolute pure vindication. My biological family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, insignificant, and worthless. They had mocked my hard work. They had tried to use me as a human shield to protect their own luxurious existence. But they had fundamentally underestimated me. They had forced me to learn how to survive in the shadows, and I had used those exact survival skills to completely dismantle their entire criminal empire in less than 48 hours. Thomas Caldwell reached over and tapped his keyboard, switching the main monitor view to a close-up camera feed of my father. The federal agents had pulled my father out of the glass office and were walking him toward the lead FBI sports utility vehicle. The lead agent, Special Agent Miller, was holding a digital tablet in his hand. He was on a secure video conference call with Thomas, coordinating the final identification protocols before officially transporting the prisoners to the federal holding facility. Agent Miller turned the tablet screen around so my father could see it. My father's face was pressed close to the camera lens. His eyes were red, swollen, and filled with tears. He looked completely exhausted, terrified, and utterly defeated. The wealthy construction boss was entirely gone. He stared at the screen, and he saw my face looking right back at him from my apartment in Chicago. I saw the exact moment the realization hit him, like a physical blow to the chest. He realized that I was not sitting in an interrogation room taking the blame for his crimes. He realized that I had found the hidden ledger in his floor safe. He realized that I had orchestrated the highly sophisticated spoofed email trap that caught Chloe. He realized that the quiet, obedient, frugal accountant daughter he had tried to destroy had methodically, meticulously, and ruthlessly burned his entire life to the ground. Abby, my father, croaked, his voice shaking with desperate, pathetic fear. He leaned closer to the camera, practically begging through the digital connection. Abby, please. You have to tell them you made a mistake. You have to tell them you transferred the money. We are family, Abby. Please. You cannot do this to your own father. We are family. I love you. I sat perfectly still in my chair. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I looked directly into the camera lens, meeting the terrified, pleading eyes of the man who had stolen my mother's legacy and tried to send me to federal prison. The man who had caused me 28 years of profound, unyielding pain. I remembered the text message he had sent me on the morning of my wedding day. The message telling me that I was entirely on my own. The message telling me to face the devastating consequences alone while he ran away to paradise. I leaned closer to my computer microphone. My expression was steely cold and completely calm. I felt absolutely nothing for the pathetic man crying on the screen. You said it yourself in your text message this morning, I replied, my voice echoing with quiet, absolute finality. You are on your own now. Do not call me again. I reached out and pushed the laptop closed. The screen went completely dark, cutting off my father's pathetic sobbing and severing his connection to my life forever. The quiet, peaceful silence of my Chicago apartment washed over me. The storm was finally over. I looked up at James, who was smiling down at me with immense, unwavering pride. I stood up, took his hand, and walked away from the table, ready to finally begin my real life. The days immediately following the dramatic raid at the Florida marina were a surreal whirlwind of federal depositions, legal paperwork, and intense financial audits. But for the very first time in my entire adult life, I was not forced to navigate the storm completely alone. Robert Callahan, the brilliant federal litigator, and Thomas Caldwell, the forensic accountant who had single-handedly changed my destiny, stood right by my side through every single meeting with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Because we had handed the authorities the digital master ledger and the legally binding electronic confession from my sister Chloe, the federal prosecutors did not even attempt to press charges against me. Special Agent Miller, the man who had personally handcuffed my father on the wooden docks in Miami, sat across from me in a sterile government conference room in downtown Chicago. He slid a thick stack of official documents across the polished mahogany table. He looked at me with deep professional respect and told me that I was completely officially cleared of any and all wrongdoing. He explained that my father's complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts had been entirely dismantled by the evidence we provided. The massive commercial loans that my father had strapped to my name using forged guarantees were completely legally voided. The private investment groups and the banking institutions had to absorb the massive financial losses themselves due to their catastrophic failure to properly verify the guarantor signatures in person. I sat in that quiet conference room and watched Robert Callahan slide a second, much more important folder directly into my hands. It contained the formal recovery orders for my biological mother's trust fund. Because my father and my sister had practically gift-wrapped their own federal indictments, the government was able to swiftly seize the $3 million Florida mansion and completely liquidate the offshore wealth management accounts in the Cayman Islands. The total sum of $3.5 million, along with significant civil damages awarded by a federal judge for extreme emotional distress and targeted financial sabotage, was returned directly to me. I stared at the official bank statement, showing my newly restored balance. My hands trembled as I held the heavy paper. It was not just a large sum of money. It was my biological mother's legacy, finally reaching the daughter she had loved so fiercely and tried so hard to protect. I felt a tremendous physical weight lift from my shoulders. The suffocating, crushing pressure of being my family's unpaid financial pack mule was gone forever. The constant, paralyzing anxiety of trying to keep my father's construction business afloat, while my stepmother and sister drained my savings, was completely erased. I was finally absolutely free. The federal trial for my father, my stepmother, Susan, and my sister Chloe was scheduled to take place the following year in a Florida district court. But I decided early on that I would not pay much attention to the lengthy legal proceedings. I already knew from Thomas that they were facing decades in federal prison for conspiracy wire fraud and grand larceny. That knowledge was enough closure for me. I made the conscious decision to legally block all of their phone numbers, preventing any calls from the county jail where they were being held without bail. I refused to let them drag me back into their toxic orbit of manipulation and endless excuses. I had a beautiful new life to rebuild, and I refused to waste another second looking backwards at the people who had tried to bury me. James and I spent the next 6 months focusing entirely on each other and our shared future. We moved out of my cramped apartment in the city and bought a beautiful, modest home in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood lined with old oak trees. We did not need a massive waterfront mansion or luxury sports cars to be happy. We just needed a place where we felt completely safe and truly valued. We spent our weekends painting the walls, planting a small garden in the backyard, and filling the rooms with sunlight and laughter. During those restorative 6 months, Thomas Caldwell became a permanent, cherished fixture in our daily lives. The elderly forensic accountant who had walked through the doors of my ruined wedding and delivered the worst news of my entire existence had slowly, miraculously become the loving father figure I had always desperately needed, but never actually had. He came over to our new house for dinner every single Sunday evening without fail. We would sit on the back patio drinking coffee and talking for hours. He taught me how to properly and safely invest my mother's recovered trust fund to ensure it would grow securely for the future children James and I hoped to have one day. He listened to me talk about the fragmented, beautiful memories I still held of my biological mother, and he never once made me feel like I was a burden or a disappointment. For 28 years, I had blindly believed that family was defined strictly by shared bloodlines and legal birth certificates. I had believed that you simply had to endure endless cruelty and financial exploitation because the people hurting you happened to share your last name. Thomas and James patiently taught me that true family is entirely a conscious choice. True family is made up of the people who stand right by your side when your entire world is falling apart. They are the ones who help you carry the heavy ledgers of life. They are the ones who shine a bright light in the dark when you are desperately searching for the truth. When the warm breeze of spring finally arrived, James and I decided it was time to officially get married. We did not want to recreate the massive, expensive, anxiety-inducing spectacle that my stepmother Susan had orchestrated the first time around. We did not want a grand cavernous church filled with 200 distant acquaintances and towering imported floral arrangements paid for with stolen money. We wanted something entirely real, intimate, and deeply personal. We chose a quiet, secluded botanical garden located on the edge of the city. The ceremony took place on a perfectly warm, sunny afternoon in late May. The surrounding trees were in full, vibrant bloom, and the air smelled incredibly sweet with the scent of fresh jasmine and damp earth. There were no velvet ropes marking reserved VIP rows for absent toxic family members. There were only 30 simple wooden chairs set up on the soft green grass, and every single chair was filled with someone who genuinely cared about us. My closest friends from college were there smiling and taking photographs. James' loyal, wonderful family members who had welcomed me into their lives with completely open arms were sitting in the front row wiping away happy tears. Elena, the kind coworker who had constantly covered my shifts when I was too stressed and exhausted to function, was sitting near the aisle beaming with joy. There were absolutely no empty spaces at this wedding. The entire garden was completely overflowing with genuine, uncompromised love. I stood alone in the small, natural bridal staging area, hidden behind a beautiful, fragrant wall of climbing white roses. I was wearing a simple, elegant silk dress that I had chosen and purchased entirely by myself. I did not have a heavy trailing veil to pull my head down or obscure my vision. I felt incredibly light, capable, and grounded. I heard the soft, beautiful acoustic music begin to play, signaling the start of the ceremony. I looked to my right and Thomas Caldwell stepped forward from behind the roses. I was wearing his signature sharp charcoal gray suit, but this time his weathered face was not pulled down with solemn pity or urgent warning. He was beaming with immense, unmistakable pride. When I had asked him to walk me down the aisle over dinner 2 months earlier, he had actually shed a silent tear. Now he offered me his strong, steady arm. I looped my hand through his, and we began to walk slowly down the stone path together. The bright afternoon sunlight filtered through the green leaves above us, casting a warm golden glow over the entire garden. I looked straight down the aisle and saw James waiting for me at the altar. His eyes were shining with total, unconditional love and absolute devotion. He was the man who had not run away or panicked when the federal authorities were closing in. He was the man who had stood right beside me in the darkest hallway of my life, ready to fight an entire criminal empire just to keep me safe. As Thomas and I reached the altar, the elderly accountant turned to me, gently kissed my cheek, and placed my hand firmly into James' warm hand. It was the most beautiful, perfect, validating moment of my entire existence. The officiant spoke wonderful, moving words about the power of resilience, about choosing a partner who inherently makes you stronger, and about the profound, beautiful courage required to start your life over from scratch. When James and I finally exchanged our wedding rings and promised to protect and cherish each other for the rest of our natural lives, the small crowd of 30 people erupted into joyous, deafening applause. We spent the rest of the magical evening eating incredible, delicious food under the emerging stars, dancing closely to our favorite acoustic songs and laughing until our sides physically ached. There was no family drama. There was no underlying financial manipulation. There was no fear of federal warrants or hidden ledgers. There was only pure, absolute, unburdened joy. Looking back on the absolute nightmare that ultimately brought me to this peaceful garden, I realize now that the devastating betrayal was the exact catalyst I needed to finally wake up and reclaim my life. For so many years, I was trapped inside a psychological prison built brick by my own parents. They used my natural empathy and my strong sense of duty as a weapon against me. They conditioned me from a very young age to believe that my sole purpose on this earth was to absorb their terrible financial mistakes and quietly facilitate their luxurious, selfish ambitions. I spent countless anxious, sleepless nights analyzing corporate balance sheets and personal bank statements, trying to figure out exactly how I could work harder to pay for a suburban mortgage that was never truly my responsibility. I allowed my stepmother Susan to constantly diminish my professional accomplishments. I allowed my sister Chloe to mock my frugal, practical choices, while she actively, aggressively spent my dead mother's carefully saved money. I allowed my father to convince me that I was simply fulfilling my inherent duty as a good, reliable daughter. But that stormy, dark Tuesday night when my father rushed into my apartment with a bag of cheap takeout food and a massive stack of fraudulent commercial guarantees was the defining, revealing moment of his true character. He looked at his own child, the child whose sacred trust fund he had already completely illegally drained, and he saw nothing but a highly convenient disposable scapegoat. He mathematically precisely calculated my exact financial ruin. He scheduled his private luxury flight to a tropical paradise on the very day I was supposed to be celebrating my marriage. He wanted the federal authorities to break down the heavy wooden doors of my wedding venue while he sipped expensive cocktails on a sunny white beach. The level of sociopathic detachment required to execute a plan like that against your own flesh and blood is completely staggering, and yet, his ultimate spectacular failure was rooted deeply in his own supreme, unearned arrogance. He completely underestimated the very professional skills he relied on me to possess. He wanted a highly trained corporate accountant to secure his fraudulent business loans, but he entirely forgot that an accountant knows exactly how to read the hidden secret language of numbers. He forgot that numbers never lie even when the people speaking them do. Every single wire transfer, every sophisticated spoofed email, every digital footprint we uncovered was a powerful testament to the absolute power of taking back control of your own narrative. When Chloe greedily clicked that accept button on the spoofed security verification, she did far more than just confess to a massive federal crime. She inadvertently handed me the permanent keys to my own freedom. She proved to the entire world that their pristine, wealthy facade was a total illusion built on a fragile foundation of absolute fraud. The millions of dollars they stole could never buy them genuine loyalty when the legal walls finally closed in around them. I saw the true ugly nature of their bond on that security camera feed from the Florida marina. The federal agents placed my father in heavy steel handcuffs. Susan instantly viciously turned on him. She screamed that she was an innocent victim completely willing to send her husband to prison for the rest of his natural life if it meant she could avoid wearing an orange jumpsuit. Chloe threw a massive childish tantrum over losing her designer leather bags, completely oblivious to the massive federal indictment crashing down on her head. They were a family completely devoid of honor, love, or mutual respect. They were simply predators who eventually devoured each other when there was no one left to exploit. My life today is a living, breathing testament to the fact that you can survive the absolute worst kind of betrayal and build something incredibly beautiful in its place. The trust fund money. My biological mother left me is safely, securely invested now, but that money is not what makes me rich. What makes me truly wealthy is the deep, comforting knowledge that I never have to set myself on fire to keep someone else warm ever again. What makes me rich is waking up every single morning next to a man who loves me for exactly who I am, not for what financial stability I can provide. What makes me rich is sitting at a dining table with Thomas Caldwell, discussing our future plans, and knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that the people in my home actually want me there. Family is not determined by blood, if that blood is only used to bleed you dry. Setting boundaries is not a betrayal, it is survival. If you believe in standing up for your own worth, please hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourself.